Caleb Rourke had buried two people he loved in the Wyoming dirt, and he'd sworn never to care about anyone again. Then he found her, a Chinese child, barefoot and half dead, stumbling through his grazing land like a ghost. Every rational bone in his body screamed to ride away. The town would destroy him for harboring her. But when those dark eyes looked up at him, filled with terror and something else, hope, maybe, he made the choice that would either save them both or damn him completely. He lifted her onto his horse and rode straight into the fire. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's ride this journey together till the very end. The fence post had rotted through again. Caleb Rourke stood in the afternoon heat, staring at the splintered wood like it was a personal insult. 3 years he'd been patching the same stretch of fence. 3 years of hammering new posts into unforgiving ground, only to watch the Wyoming wind and weather tear them down again. Sometimes he wondered why he bothered. There wasn't much livestock left to contain. Wasn't much of anything left, really. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a calloused hand and squinted toward the horizon. The land stretched out in every direction, brown, empty, and honest in its cruelty. That's what he'd always appreciated about Wyoming territory. It didn't lie to you, didn't promise what it couldn't deliver. It just existed, harsh and indifferent, and you either survived it or you didn't. Most didn't. Caleb pulled the hammer from his belt and drove a new post into the hole he'd dug. The impact vibrated up his arms, once, twice, 3 times. The rhythm was familiar, almost meditative. He'd spent most of the last 5 years doing work like this, hard, simple, requiring nothing but muscle and stubbornness, the kind of work that left you too tired to think when the sun went down. That was the point. He was reaching for another post when he saw the movement. At first he thought it was a coyote, or maybe a pronghorn that had wandered too close to the fence line, but the shape was wrong, too upright, too deliberate in its stumbling progress across the open ground. Caleb straightened, shading his eyes against the glare. A person. His jaw tightened. People meant trouble. Always had. Always would. Out here, if someone was walking alone across open range in the middle of the day, it usually meant they were running from something, or should be. He watched the figure approach, moving in that strange, lurching way that spoke of exhaustion or injury. Maybe both. Part of him wanted to mount his horse and ride in the opposite direction. Let whatever tragedy was unfolding continue to unfold somewhere that wasn't his problem. But he didn't move. The figure grew closer, and details emerged that made his chest tighten. Small. Too small to be a grown man. The gait was uneven, like every step took more strength than the body had to give. A child. Hell, Caleb muttered. He left his tools by the fence and started walking toward the approaching figure. As the distance closed, more details crystallized. Dark hair, matted and wild. Skin burned dark by sun. Clothes that might have once been a dress, but were now little more than rags hanging from a skeletal frame. And no shoes. The child's feet were bare, torn and bleeding from walking across the rough ground. Caleb's pace quickened. When he was 20 yards away, the child's legs gave out, just folded like someone had cut the strings. The small body crumpled to the dirt in a heap. Caleb broke into a run. He dropped to his knees beside the child and immediately realized 2 things. First, it was a girl, probably no more than 7 or 8 years old. Second, she wasn't white. Chinese, he realized. One of the railroad workers' families, maybe. Or someone who'd escaped from one of the work camps that dotted the territory like scars. Her eyes fluttered open as he reached for her. They were dark and wide and absolutely terrified. She tried to scramble backward, a sound escaping her throat. Half whimper, half gasp. "Easy," Caleb said, keeping his voice low. "Easy now." She didn't understand him. That much was clear from the blank panic in her stare. Her chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. Caleb could see the outline of her ribs through the torn fabric of her dress. He'd seen that look before. In wounded animals, in soldiers during the war, in his wife's eyes during those final, terrible days. The look of something that had already given up. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, knowing the words were useless. She didn't speak English, probably didn't speak anything he could understand. He reached out slowly, carefully, the way he would approach a spooked horse. His hand touched her shoulder, nothing but bone beneath papery skin, and she flinched but didn't pull away. Didn't have the strength left for it. Caleb made a decision he knew he'd probably regret. "All right," he said quietly. "All right then." He stood, scooped the child into his arms, she weighed almost nothing, and started walking back toward where he'd left his horse. She didn't fight him, didn't make a sound, just lay in his arms like something already dead, except for those eyes. Those eyes tracked his face with an intensity that made his skin prickle. His horse, a bay gelding named Rust, snorted as Caleb approached with his burden. "Yeah, I know," Caleb muttered. "Don't start." He managed to mount with the girl cradled in one arm. Years of handling livestock had made him good at awkward maneuvers and settled her in front of him. Her head lolled against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid and weak like a bird's. The ride back to his cabin took 20 minutes. Caleb spent the entire time arguing with himself. This was stupid, dangerous. The town was already suspicious of him for living out here alone, avoiding people, keeping to himself. If anyone found out he'd taken in a Chinese child, they'd come for her. Maybe come for him too. Wyoming Territory wasn't kind to anyone who stepped outside the lines, and harboring a Chinese kid when the railroad had just finished and anti-Chinese sentiment was running high? That was asking for a hanging. But what was the alternative? Leave her to die in the dirt? He'd already tried being that person. The person who looked away, who let the world's cruelty roll past without getting involved. It had been easy after Sarah died, after the baby died too, still curled inside her. He'd buried them both in the same grave and decided right then that caring about anything was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. 3 years of not caring, 3 years of just existing, like the land itself. And here he was, holding a dying child against his chest and riding straight back into the world of things that mattered. "Stupid," he said aloud. The girl's eyes had closed. For a moment, panic seized him. Was she dead? But then he felt the shallow rise and fall of her breath. Still alive, for now. The cabin appeared over a low rise, exactly as he'd left it that morning. Small, weathered, functional. Nothing about it suggested warmth or welcome. It was a structure designed for survival, not living. One room, a chimney, a lean-to for the horse. Sarah had hated it. "It's temporary," he'd promised her when they first arrived. "Just until we get established. Then I'll build you something proper." But they'd never gotten established, and the temporary cabin had become permanent, a monument to all the plans that died with her. Caleb dismounted and carried the girl inside. The interior was dim and cool, a relief after the brutal sun. He laid her on his bed, the only bed, a narrow frame with a thin mattress that had seen better days. She looked even smaller there, swallowed by the rough blanket. Water first, then food, if she could keep it down. He grabbed the bucket by the door and headed to the well outside. As he worked the pump handle, his mind was already racing through problems. She needed clean clothes, medicine, if he had anything useful, a way to communicate. And then what? Keep her here? Send her away? To where? The bucket filled, cold water splashing over the rim. Caleb carried it back inside and found the girl exactly where he'd left her, eyes still closed. He tore a strip from one of his old shirts. He didn't have much, but he had more than she did, and soaked it in the water. "All right," he said, more to himself than to her. "Let's see what we're working with." He started with her face, gently wiping away layers of dirt and dried blood. Beneath the grime, her features emerged, small, delicate, younger than he'd initially thought. Maybe 6. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her cheeks were hollow. How long had she been walking? He moved to her arms next, cleaning the cuts and scrapes that covered her skin like a map of suffering. Some of the wounds were fresh. Others had started to scab over, only to crack open again. When he reached her hands, he found her fingertips raw and torn. She'd been digging, or climbing, or both. Her feet were the worst. The soles were shredded, embedded with dirt and small stones. Caleb worked carefully, picking out debris and cleaning each wound with water that quickly turned rust-colored in the bucket. Through it all, she didn't wake, didn't make a sound. When he finished, he covered her with the blanket and sat back in the room's only chair, a battered thing he'd built himself from scrap lumber. Now what? The question hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon. In a few hours, it would be dark. He'd need to light the lamp, make some kind of food, figure out if the girl would live through the night, figure out if he wanted her to. That thought stopped him cold. Of course he wanted her to live. What kind of question was that? He wasn't a monster. He'd brought her here to help her, not to sit and watch her die in his bed. But helping her meant getting involved, meant caring about something again. And he'd worked so hard not to care. Caleb stood abruptly and busied himself with preparing food. He had beans, some dried meat, a few potatoes that were starting to sprout. Nothing fancy, but it was something. He got the stove going and put together a weak broth, something her stomach might be able to handle. While it cooked, he rummaged through his few possessions, looking for anything that might serve as clothing for a child. He didn't have much. A few shirts, 2 pairs of pants, some union suits for winter, nothing that would fit a little girl. He finally settled on one of his older shirts, the fabric soft from years of wear. It would be huge on her, but it was clean and whole. Better than the rags she'd arrived in. The broth was ready just as the last light was fading from the windows. Caleb lit the lamp and carried a bowl to the bedside. "Hey," he said softly. "You need to wake up now." No response. He set the bowl down and touched her shoulder. Her skin was hot. Fever, probably. His stomach sank. Fever meant infection, and infection out here, with no doctor within 2 days' ride. "Come on," he said, more urgently. "Wake up." Her eyelids fluttered, opened halfway. Those dark eyes found his face, and for a moment she just stared at him. Then her brow furrowed, confusion mixing with fear. "You need to drink," Caleb said, reaching for the bowl. "I know you don't understand me, but you need to drink this." He held the bowl close to her face, letting the steam rise. The girl's nostrils flared. Her cracked lips parted slightly. Taking that as permission, Caleb carefully tipped a small amount of broth into her mouth. She swallowed reflexively, then coughed, then swallowed again. "That's it," Caleb murmured. "Just a little at a time." He fed her slowly, patiently, waiting between each small sip for her to keep it down. The process took nearly half an hour. By the end, she'd consumed maybe a cup of broth, and her eyes were drooping again. Caleb set the bowl aside and pulled the blanket up to her chin. "You sleep," he said. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." If there was a tomorrow. He settled back into the chair, intending to keep watch for a while. Just an hour or two to make sure she didn't take a turn, but exhaustion from a full day's work pulled at him, and before he knew it, his eyes were closing. The last thing he thought before sleep took him was that he'd made a terrible mistake, and that he'd probably make it again. Caleb woke to screaming. He was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, heart hammering. The cabin was dark except for the dying embers in the stove. The screaming continued, high-pitched, terrified, coming from the bed. The girl was sitting up, or trying to, her small body rigid with panic. She was staring at him like he was a demon. "Hey, hey!" Caleb raised his hands, keeping his distance. "It's all right. You're safe." She didn't understand the words, but his tone must have registered because the screaming cut off into ragged breathing. She pressed herself against the wall, pulling the blanket up like a shield. They stared at each other across the dark room. Caleb moved slowly, deliberately, to light the lamp. The warm glow filled the space, pushing back shadows. He kept his movement slow, non-threatening. "You're in my cabin," he said quietly, knowing it was useless but needing to say something. "I found you yesterday. You were dying. I brought you here." The girl's eyes darted around the room, taking in the sparse furnishings, the single door, the window. Measuring escape routes, Caleb realized. Smart. "I'm not going to hurt you," he continued. "You were sick. Still are, probably. You need rest." She said something then, a string of words in a language he didn't recognize. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but the meaning was clear even without translation. "Where am I? What do you want? Who are you?" "I'm Caleb," he said, pointing to himself. "Caleb." He repeated it twice more, and on the third repetition, something flickered in her eyes. Not understanding exactly, but recognition that he was trying to communicate. She touched her own chest with trembling fingers and said something that sounded like Ming. "Ming," Caleb repeated. She nodded once, quick and sharp. They regarded each other in silence. The girl, Ming, was still pressed against the wall, But some of the panic had left her face. Now she just looked exhausted and wary. Caleb gestured to the bowl of broth, still sitting on the floor by the bed where he'd left it. Cold now, but probably still edible. "You should eat," he said, miming bringing food to his mouth. Ming's eyes flicked to the bowl, then back to him. She didn't move. Caleb picked up the bowl himself and took a small sip, demonstrating it was safe. Then he offered it to her, setting it on the edge of the bed within her reach before backing away to give her space. For a long moment, Ming didn't move. Then slowly, she reached for the bowl. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped it, but she managed to get it to her lips and drink. The broth was gone in seconds. She set the empty bowl down and looked at him with something that might have been hope or might have been desperation. "More." Caleb nodded and took the bowl. "I'll make more." He spent the next hour preparing food and watching Ming slowly accept that she wasn't in immediate danger. She didn't speak again, but she ate everything he offered. More broth, some softened beans, small pieces of bread soaked until they were easy to swallow. When she finally lay back down, her eyes were already closing. The food and the warmth of the cabin were pulling her under. Caleb sat in his chair and watched her sleep. In the lamplight, she looked impossibly small. A child who should have been playing somewhere, learning things, being protected by people who loved her. Instead, she'd ended up here, in a cabin with a man who'd forgotten how to care about anything. Outside, the Wyoming wind picked up, rattling the walls. It was going to be a cold night. Winter was coming early this year. You could feel it in the air. Caleb added more wood to the stove and settled in to keep watch. By morning, the fever had gotten worse. Ming's skin burned under Caleb's palm when he checked on her at first light. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. When he tried to wake her, her eyes opened but didn't focus on anything. "Damn," Caleb muttered. He'd seen fever like this before. During the war, mostly, men who'd taken minor wounds that turned septic. Some of them pulled through, most didn't. He had willow bark for pain, some herbs he'd learned from an old trapper years ago. Nothing that would cure infection, but maybe enough to give her body a fighting chance. He spent the morning preparing remedies and trying to get fluids into her. It was slow work. She'd wake up confused and frightened, then drift back into fevered sleep. Sometimes she'd cry out in that language he didn't understand, words that sounded like names. Mother, father, help me. By afternoon, Caleb was exhausted and starting to despair. The fever wasn't breaking. If anything, it was getting worse. Ming's small body was burning itself up from the inside, and there was nothing he could do except watch. He was preparing another batch of willow bark tea when he heard the sound. Hoofbeats. Caleb's head snapped up. Someone was approaching the cabin. Multiple someones, from the sound of it. His hand went instinctively to the rifle mounted above the door. Visitors were rare out here, and rarely good news when they came. He grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, staying back from the opening enough that he wouldn't be easily seen. 3 riders were approaching from the east, moving at an easy pace. 2 men, and was that a woman? Caleb's jaw tightened. He recognized one of the men, Tom Fletcher, who ran the general store in town. The other was someone he didn't know, broad-shouldered and mean-looking. The woman rode between them, and even from this distance, Caleb could see she was barely staying in the saddle. They pulled up about 20 yards from the cabin. Fletcher dismounted and raised a hand in greeting. "Rourke," he called me, "she's need to talk to you." Caleb didn't move from the window. "I'm listening. Come on out here. This concerns you." "Whatever it is, you can say it from there." Fletcher exchanged a look with the other man, who hadn't dismounted. There was something wrong about this whole situation. The woman swayed in her saddle, and Caleb could see now that her clothes were torn and stained dark with something that looked like blood. "We're looking for a child," Fletcher said. His voice carried easily across the open ground. "Chinese girl. About 6 or 7 years old. You seen anything like that?" Caleb's finger moved to the rifle's trigger. "Why would I have seen a Chinese child?" "Railroad camp got hit 3 days ago," Fletcher continued. "Bandits. Killed most of the men, took what they wanted. This woman here," he gestured to the rider, "she says her daughter ran off during the attack. Been tracking her ever since." The woman lifted her head at that, and Caleb got his first good look at her face, dark eyes, hollow with grief and exhaustion. She said something in Chinese, urgent and pleading. Fletcher glanced at her, then back at Caleb. "She's asking if you've seen her kid. Girl's name is Ming." The world seemed to slow down. Caleb's mind raced through options. He could lie, send them away. But the woman would know. Something in her eyes said she'd know if he was lying about her daughter. And then what? Would she come back with others? Would Fletcher? "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Caleb called back. "How do I know you're not the ones who attacked the camp?" The mean-looking one laughed at that. "You calling us bandits?" "I'm saying I don't know you," Caleb said flatly. "And I don't trust anybody who shows up at my door asking questions about a child." The woman spoke again, faster now, desperate. She started to dismount, nearly fell, and had to catch herself against the horse. Fletcher steadied her. "Look, Rourke, the woman just wants her daughter back. That's all this is. If you've seen the girl, let her come up here alone," Caleb interrupted. "The mother, nobody else. Now hold on, that's the deal. She comes up alone, I'll talk to her. You two stay right where you are." Fletcher looked ready to argue, but the woman was already walking toward the cabin. She stumbled twice, caught herself, kept coming. Caleb lowered the rifle but didn't set it down. He watched the two men, making sure they stayed mounted, while the woman approached. When she was close enough, he opened the door and stepped out. Up close, she looked worse than he'd thought. There was a bandage wrapped around her left arm, soaked through with old blood. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. She moved like every step hurt, but her good eye found his face and held it. "Ming," she said. Just the name, but the weight of everything else was behind it. Hope, fear, desperate, terrible need. Caleb studied her, looked past her to where Fletcher and the other man sat their horses. Looked back at her. Made a decision. "She's inside," he said quietly. The woman's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed his arm for support, and he could feel her trembling. "She's sick," he continued. "Fever, bad one. But she's alive." The woman said something rapid in Chinese. Caleb didn't need translation for the thank you buried in those words. He guided her inside, keeping himself between her and the bed where Ming lay. The woman stopped when she saw her daughter, made a sound like something breaking, and then she was across the room, dropping to her knees beside the bed. She touched Ming's face with shaking hands, felt the heat of fever, and turned to look at Caleb with raw panic. "I know," he said. "I've been trying to bring it down. It's bad, but she's fought this long." The woman said something in Chinese, then seemed to realize he didn't understand. She looked around the cabin, taking in the water bucket, the strips of cloth, the herbs steeping in a pot on the stove. Understanding crossed her face. She looked back at him, and this time there was a question in her eyes. Why? Caleb didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he had too many answers, none of them simple. "Found her walking across my range yesterday," he said. "Couldn't just leave her." The woman stared at him for a long moment, then turned back to her daughter. She stroked Ming's hair, murmured things in Chinese that sounded like prayers or promises, or both. Outside, Fletcher was getting impatient. "Rourke, everything all right in there?" Caleb moved back to the door. "Yeah, give us a minute. We need to get moving. Sun's getting low." "I said give us a minute." He closed the door, cutting off Fletcher's response. When he turned back, the woman was watching him again. She'd carefully lifted Ming into her arms. The child stirred but didn't wake, and was holding her like something precious that might disappear. "You can't travel with her like this," Caleb said, knowing the woman probably wouldn't understand but needing to say it anyway. "That fever's going to kill her if you try to move her far." The woman's jaw tightened. She spoke in Chinese again, frustrated. Caleb rubbed his face. This was getting complicated fast. He had a dying child, a wounded woman, and two men outside who'd probably come back with more questions if things didn't go the way they expected. "You got anywhere to go?" he asked. "Family? Friends?" The woman shook her head. Then, halting and careful, she said, "Dead. All dead." Her English was broken but understandable. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. "The men outside," he said. "They helping you?" She looked toward the door, and something dark crossed her face. "No trust," she said carefully. "No. Safe." That was all Caleb needed to hear. He'd been in enough bad situations to recognize when someone was afraid of the people claiming to help them. "Stay here," he said, surprising himself. "Both of you. Until she's better." The woman's eyes widened. Here? You got a better option? She didn't answer, just looked down at her daughter, then back at Caleb, measuring him, trying to decide if this was another trap or an actual lifeline. Caleb understood the hesitation. I'm not asking for anything, he said quietly. And I'm not going to hurt you. Either of you. I'm just saying, she can't travel like this. Stay until the fever breaks, then you can decide what you want to do. Outside, Fletcher called again. Rourke, we're going to come in there if you don't answer. You need to send them away, the woman said suddenly. Her English was getting better as she relaxed. They find Ming. They take her. Why? Town no want Chinese. Railroad finished, no more work. They say we... She searched for the word. Go back, but nowhere to go. Caleb's hands curled into fists. He'd heard the talk in town. Chinese workers being run out, their camps burned, families scattered, or worse. He told himself it wasn't his problem, that staying out of it was the smart thing. Looked like he was done being smart. All right, he said. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go out there and tell them I haven't seen any child. You and Ming, you stay quiet. Don't make a sound. Understand? The woman nodded, already moving deeper into the cabin's shadows, holding her daughter close. Caleb picked up his rifle and went back outside. Fletcher and the other man had dismounted and were standing closer to the cabin now. Both had their hands near their sidearms. Everything all right, Rourke? Fletcher asked. His voice was friendly enough, but his eyes were hard. Fine, Caleb said. Woman wanted to see inside, make sure the girl wasn't here. And? And she's not. I told you, I haven't seen any Chinese child. The other man, Caleb still didn't know his name, spat into the dirt. Heard talking in there. Sounded like more than just you two. Woman was upset, Caleb said evenly. Crying mostly. You want to come in and look around, be my guest? But you're wasting your time. Fletcher held up a hand. No need for that. Just trying to help the woman find her daughter. Seems to me she's found all she's going to find here, Caleb said. Best you move along. Check someone else's property. The woman emerged from the cabin then, and Caleb had to give her credit. She played her part perfectly. She looked defeated, hopeless. Said something in Chinese that sounded like mourning. Fletcher sighed. Sorry, ma'am. We'll keep looking. She nodded once, not meeting anyone's eyes, and walked back toward the horses. The mean-looking one watched her go, then turned to Caleb. You know it's a crime, right? Harboring Chinese without papers? Good thing I'm not harboring anybody then, Caleb said. They stared at each other. Caleb kept his rifle cradled casually, not pointing at anyone, but ready to move if needed. Finally, Fletcher broke the tension. Come on, Hayes. We got ground to cover before dark. Hayes, so that was his name, gave Caleb one last suspicious look before mounting up. The woman climbed onto her horse with visible effort. The three riders turned and headed east, back toward town. Caleb stood outside his cabin and watched them until they disappeared over the rise. Then he went back inside. The woman, he still didn't know her name, was sitting on the floor beside the bed, one hand resting on her daughter's chest, feeling each breath. She looked up when Caleb entered. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb set the rifle back above the door. They'll be back. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Fletcher's not stupid. He knows something's off. Then we go, she said, starting to stand. No. Caleb moved to block her path to the door. Look at your daughter. Look at yourself. You go out there now, you're both dead by morning. Then what? There was fire in her eyes despite the exhaustion. Stay here? Wait for them to come with more men? Maybe, or maybe we figure something else out. But right now, you need rest and your daughter needs to not die from fever. Everything else can wait. They faced each other across the small cabin. Caleb could see the calculations running behind her eyes. Trust versus risk. Hope versus experience. She looked down at Ming, small and still beneath the blanket. When she looked back up, some of the fight had gone out of her. My name is Lian, she said. Lian Zhou. Caleb Rourke. Why you help us, Caleb Rourke? It was the same question he'd been asking himself since yesterday. He still didn't have a good answer. Because no one helped me when I needed it, he finally said. And I remember what that felt like. Lian studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once and sat back down beside her daughter. "Okay," she said, "we stay. For now." Caleb grabbed the extra blanket from his chest and tossed it to her. "You can have the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." "No, I stay here. With Ming." "Suit yourself." He turned away to give her privacy and started preparing more broth. Behind him, he heard her murmuring to Ming in Chinese, words soft and rhythmic like a lullaby. Outside, the sun was setting. The temperature was already dropping. It was going to be a long night. Hell, Caleb thought, it was going to be a long few days. He just painted a target on his back for a woman and child he didn't know, couldn't communicate with properly, and had absolutely no plan for protecting if things went south. Sarah would have said he was being reckless. Stupid. Throwing away everything for strangers who'd probably just leave the moment they were able. Maybe she'd be right. But as Caleb listened to Leon's voice, soft and fierce, as she promised her daughter things that might be lies. "You'll be okay. We're safe here. Mama's here now." He thought maybe being stupid was the only decent option left. He'd buried his heart with Sarah and the baby. Thought he was done with caring, with trying, with any of it. Turned out the heart had other ideas. "Damn," he muttered, stirring the pot harder than necessary. Behind him, Leon started to hum, a tune he didn't recognize, foreign and sad and somehow hopeful all at once. And in the small cabin in the middle of nowhere, three people who had no business being together settled in for the night, bound by nothing but need and the strange, dangerous decision to give a damn about something other than survival. It wasn't much. But sometimes not much was all you had. And sometimes, if you were lucky or unlucky, it was enough. The fever didn't break that night, or the next day, or the day after that. Caleb watched Ming deteriorate in stages. The first night, she'd thrashed and cried out. The second, she'd gone still and quiet, which was somehow worse. By the third day, her breathing had turned shallow and irregular, like her body was forgetting how to do it. Leon never left her daughter's side. She sat on the floor beside the bed, one hand always touching Ming, her forehead, her arm, her chest. Caleb would wake in the dark and see Leon's silhouette, perfectly still except for that hand, monitoring each breath like she could keep her daughter alive through sheer force of will. Maybe she could. Caleb had seen stranger things. He'd given Leon the shirt he'd set aside for Ming, and she'd changed the girl into it during one of the brief periods when Ming had been lucid enough to cooperate. The fever had come roaring back almost immediately, but at least she was clean now. Leon had washed Ming's hair in the basin, working carefully around the tangles, murmuring things in Chinese that Caleb didn't need to understand. His own presence in the cabin had become almost ghost-like. He cooked. He fetched water. He changed out the cloth compresses when Leon's hands were too tired to wring out the excess. But mostly he stayed back, giving them space, trying not to intrude on whatever private battle was happening in that bed. On the morning of the fourth day, Caleb woke to find Leon slumped over, her head resting on the mattress beside Ming. She was asleep, finally, her injured arm cradled against her chest. He'd tried to get her to let him look at that wound. She'd refused every time, shaking her head and turning back to Ming. But Caleb could see the bandage was soaked through, and the skin around it had started to turn colors that made his stomach tight. She was infected too. Maybe not as bad as Ming, but getting there. Caleb stood and moved quietly to the stove. He built up the fire and put coffee on, then checked their supplies. He had enough food for maybe another week, if they were careful. Water wasn't a problem, the well was good, but medicine was running low. He'd used most of his willow bark, and the herbs were nearly gone. He was going to have to ride into town. There was no avoiding it. The thought made his jaw clench. Every instinct screamed that going into town was asking for trouble. Fletcher would be there. Hayes. Others who'd heard about the missing Chinese girl by now. Small towns had big mouths, and secrets had a way of becoming common knowledge before you'd even decided they were secrets. But the alternative was watching two people die in his cabin while he sat on his hands. Some choice. Caleb poured himself coffee and sat at the table, thinking through the logistics. He'd need to leave before dawn, get to town early when fewer people were around. Hit the general store, maybe the doctor's office if Doc Wilson was sober. Get back before dark. That meant leaving Leon and Ming alone for most of the day. He glanced at the rifle above the door. He'd have to leave it with her, show her how to use it, assuming she didn't already know. Make sure she understood that if anyone came to the cabin while he was gone, she needed to stay hidden and stay quiet. The coffee was bitter, burnt from sitting too long on the heat. Caleb drank it anyway. Behind him, Leon stirred. He heard her soft gasp, the sound of someone waking to pain, and then the rustle of fabric as she checked on Ming. "She's still breathing," Caleb said without turning around. A pause. Then, "Yes." Her English was getting better. She'd been practicing, Caleb realized. Listening to him talk, even when he was just muttering to himself about the stove or the weather. Picking up words, fitting them together. "You should eat something," Caleb said. "Not hungry." "Eat anyway. You're no good to her if you collapse." He heard her move, the soft pad of bare feet on the rough floor. She appeared at the edge of his vision, swaying slightly. In the morning light coming through the window, she looked like something drawn by a child, all wrong angles and shadows. Caleb pushed a plate toward the empty chair. "Sit." Leanne looked at the plate, just beans and bread, nothing fancy, then at him. For a moment he thought she'd refuse. Then she sank into the chair like someone who'd been standing for 1,000 years. They ate in silence. Caleb could hear Ming's breathing from across the room, ragged and uneven. Each inhale sounded like it took effort. Each exhale sounded like it might be the last. "I need to go to town," Caleb said finally. Leanne's head snapped up. "No? We're out of medicine, out of things that might help her. They will know. They will ask questions." "Probably. But she's dying, Leanne. Another day like this, maybe 2, and she's gone. You know that." Leanne's good eye, the other was still swollen shut, the bruising a sick rainbow of colors, fixed on him. "If you go, they follow you back." "Maybe. Not maybe. They follow. They come here. They take Ming." Caleb set down his fork. "So what's your plan? Watch her die? Is that better?" "My plan?" Leanne's voice cracked. "My plan was railroad. Work hard, save money, bring Ming to better place. That was plan. Then bandits come, kill everyone, take everything. Now I have no plan, just—" She gestured helplessly at the cabin, at Ming, at the whole impossible situation. "This." The silence that followed was heavy enough to break furniture. "I'll be careful," Caleb said. "I'll go early before people are around. Get what we need and get out. And if they follow, then I'll deal with it." Leanne shook her head slowly. "You are one man. They are many. You cannot—" "I know what I can't do," Caleb interrupted. His voice came out harder than he intended. "But I also know what happens if I do nothing. I've done nothing before. Watched someone He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "I watched someone die because I didn't act fast enough. I'm not doing that again." Leanne studied him, really studied him, like she was reading a book written in a language she'd only just learned. "Your wife," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Caleb's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "Yeah." "How'd she die?" "Childbirth. Baby died too. Couldn't get her to a doctor in time. By the time I got someone out here, it was—" He stared into the dark liquid. "It was too late." "So you build this?" Leanne gestured at the cabin, the emptiness of it. "This place to be alone." "Something like that. And now we are here, breaking your alone." Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. "Yeah, you're doing a real good job of that." Leanne looked down at her plate. She'd barely eaten, just pushed the beans around. "I am sorry for bringing trouble." "You didn't bring anything. I made a choice. That's on me." "Why?" The question came out fierce. "Why you choose this? You do not know us. We are nothing to you." Caleb thought about that. Thought about Ming stumbling across his land, half dead and alone. Thought about the moment he could have ridden away and didn't. "My wife," he said slowly, "she used to say that the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when no one would ever know. When there's no reward, no recognition, no reason except that it's the right thing." He met Leanne's eyes. "Found you and your daughter when no one was watching. Guess I'm still trying to be the man Sarah thought I was." Leanne was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You're Sarah. She was lucky woman. I was the lucky one." They sat with that for a while. Outside, a crow called harsh and lonely. The sound echoed across the empty plains. "If you go to town," Lian said finally. You teach me rifle first. Caleb nodded. Fair enough. After breakfast, he took her outside. The morning was cold, frost still clinging to the patches of grass that grew near the well. Lian wrapped herself in one of his coats. It hung on her like a tent, and followed him to where he'd set up a makeshift target against the far wall of the lean-to. The rifle felt heavy in Caleb's hands as he showed her how to load it. Lian watched intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. You ever shoot before? He asked. No. All right. It's got a kick, so you need to hold it tight against your shoulder. Like this. He demonstrated, bringing the rifle up and settling it. You hold it loose, it'll knock you on your ass. Lian's mouth quirked. My ass already knocked many times. One more will not matter. Caleb blinked, surprised into a short laugh. It felt strange in his throat, like an engine that hadn't been used in years. He handed her the rifle, then moved behind her to adjust her stance. Feet apart. Good. Now tuck it in. Tighter. There. Lian aimed at the target, her hands trembling slightly from either cold or pain. Probably both. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Squeeze. Smooth and steady. The rifle cracked. Lian stumbled back from the recoil, and Caleb steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. The bullet had gone wide, punching into the wall a foot from the target. Again, Lian said. They went through it 5 more times. By the 6th shot, she was barely flinching from the kick. By the 10th, she hit the edge of the target. Good enough, Caleb said, taking the rifle back. You probably won't need it, but if someone comes while I'm gone... I hide, Lian finished. Stay quiet. Only shoot if I must. Yeah. They walked back to the cabin. Caleb could see Lian favoring her injured arm, holding it close. The shooting had aggravated it. Let me see that, he said, nodding at the wound. It's fine. It's not fine. You can barely move it. After, when you come back, Ming needs her mother healthy, Caleb interrupted. 5 minutes, then I'll go. Lian hesitated, then nodded. Inside, she sat at the table and carefully unwrapped the bandage. The smell hit Caleb first, sweet and rotten, the unmistakable stink of infection. The wound beneath was worse than he'd imagined. A deep gash, badly stitched with what looked like thread from her dress. The flesh around it was swollen and discolored. Hell, Lian, why didn't you say something? What would you do? You are not doctor. No, but I've cleaned enough wounds to know this one's going to kill you if we don't deal with it. He grabbed his supplies, what was left of them, and set to work. The stitches had to come out first. Lian's jaw locked tight as he cut through them, but she didn't make a sound. The wound wept fluid that wasn't quite blood and wasn't quite pus. Caleb cleaned it as best he could with hot water and the last of his whiskey. Lian's knuckles went white against the table, but still, she stayed quiet. When he was done, he wrapped it with the cleanest cloth he had. That's not going to hold long, he said. I'll get proper supplies in town. Lian looked down at the fresh bandage. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to hurt like hell once the shock wears off. Pain is... She searched for the word. Old friend. I know how to live with it. Something in the way she said it made Caleb pause. He recognized that tone. The flat acceptance of someone who'd suffered long enough that pain was just another part of breathing. Yeah, he said quietly. I know that feeling. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Caleb understood that whatever else was happening here, the fever, the hiding, the whole desperate mess, there was something else forming beneath it. Recognition. Not the romantic kind, nothing so simple, but the deep, wordless knowledge that comes from meeting someone who's been broken the same way you have. He stood abruptly. I should get moving. Sun's up. Lian nodded and went back to Ming's bedside. Caleb gathered what he needed. Saddlebag, some money from the tin he kept hidden under a floorboard, his pistol. He left the rifle propped by the door where Lian could reach it. I'll be back before dark, he said. Be careful. Always am. It was a lie. And they both knew it. The ride to town took 3 hours. Caleb pushed Rust harder than he normally would, making up time. The plain stretched out in every direction, brown and endless. A few pronghorn watched him pass, their white rumps flashing as they bounded away. The sky was clear, the sun bright and cold. Winter weather. By December, this whole territory would be locked under snow and ice. If Ming and Lian were still at his cabin, then Caleb cut off that thought, one problem at a time. He reached town just after noon. The place wasn't much to look at. A main street with a dozen buildings, most of them looking like a strong wind could knock them over. The general store, the saloon, Doc Wilson's office, identifiable by the crooked sign. A few houses scattered behind the main drag. Caleb tied Russ to the post outside the general store and went in. Tom Fletcher was behind the counter, exactly where Caleb had known he'd be. Fletcher looked up when the bell jangled and something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe. Or suspicion. "Rourke," Fletcher said. "Been a while. Need supplies?" Sure. What are you looking for?" Caleb rattled off a list. Willow bark, laudanum, if Fletcher had any, clean bandages, carbolic acid for cleaning wounds. Fletcher's eyebrows climbed with each item. "That's a lot of medical supplies," Fletcher said carefully. "You hurt?" "Horse got cut up on some wire. Want to make sure it doesn't go bad." It was a weak lie, and Fletcher's expression said he knew it, but he gathered the supplies without comment, piling them on the counter. "Anything else?" "Some coffee, flour, beans." Fletcher added those to the pile. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was thinking through something. "Heard you had a visitor the other day," Fletcher said casually. "That Chinese woman. She find what she was looking for?" "Nope." "Shame. Hayes wanted to keep searching your property. I told him you'd let us know if you saw anything." Caleb met Fletcher's eyes. "And I would have." They stared at each other. Fletcher was the first to look away, but Caleb could see his jaw working, chewing on thoughts he wasn't saying out loud. "That'll be $6, Fletcher said. Caleb paid and gathered his supplies. He was almost to the door when Fletcher spoke again. "Rourke, you know what happens to people who hide Chinese workers, right? After what happened with the railroad?" Caleb stopped but didn't turn around. "I imagine it's nothing good. Town's got feelings on the subject, strong feelings. Man would have to be either brave or stupid to go against that." "Good thing I'm neither then." He walked out before Fletcher could respond. The rest of the trip was easier. Doc Wilson was drunk, as expected, but coherent enough to sell Caleb some extra laudanum and a bottle of something he claimed would help with fever. Caleb didn't ask questions. He just paid and left. He was loading the supplies onto Rust when he heard boots on the boardwalk behind him. "Afternoon, Rourke." Caleb turned. Hayes stood there, thumbs hooked in his belt, smiling like they were old friends. "Hayes. Funny running into you. Heard you were in town buying medical supplies." Hayes tilted his head. "For a horse," Fletcher said. "That's right." "Must be some horse. Amount of supplies you got there could treat a whole family." Caleb finished tying down the saddlebag. "You keeping tabs on me?" "Just making conversation. Town's concerned is all. About the Chinese girl. Fletcher thinks maybe you weren't entirely honest with us." "Fletcher can think whatever he wants." Hayes' smile didn't waver, but something cold entered his eyes. "You seem like a smart man, Rourke. Smart enough to know that harboring fugitives is a crime. Smart enough to know what happens to people who commit crimes around here." "Good thing I'm not harboring anybody, then." "That's good to hear. Real good." Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. "See, the thing is, some folks in town think maybe we should come out to your place. Take another look around, just to be sure. Nothing personal." "When?" "Oh, I don't know. Soon. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tonight. Hard to say." It was a threat dressed up as a warning. Caleb kept his face neutral, but his mind was already racing. If they came tonight, he wouldn't have time to prepare. Lian couldn't move fast with her injury. Ming couldn't move at all. "My property, my rules," Caleb said quietly. "You want to come out there? You better bring more than smiles and threats." Hayes' expression darkened. "That sounds like you're planning to make trouble." "That sounds like I'm planning to defend what's mine." They faced each other in the dusty street. A few townspeople had stopped to watch, sensing drama. Hayes glanced at them, then back at Caleb. "You're making a mistake," Hayes said. "Won't be my first." Caleb mounted Rust and turned him toward home. He could feel Hayes watching him all the way to the edge of town. The ride back was faster than the ride in. Caleb pushed Rust hard, urgency thrumming in his chest. Hayes had been fishing, testing to see what Caleb would give away. And Caleb had given away plenty: defensiveness, anger, the telltale signs of someone with something to hide. They'd come tonight. He was sure of it. The sun was starting its descent when Caleb's cabin came into view. Everything looked quiet. No smoke from other fires, no riders on the horizon. Yet. He dismounted and hurried inside. Lian was where he'd left her, sitting beside Ming. She looked up as he entered, relief flooding her face. "You come back." "Said I would. How is she?" Lian's expression crumpled. "Worse. She will not wake now, will not drink. I think—" Her voice broke. "I think she is leaving me." Caleb set down the supplies and moved to the bed. Ming looked smaller than she had that morning, if that was even possible. Her skin had a gray tint that made his stomach drop. Her breathing was barely visible. "Give me the laudanum," Lian said urgently. "The medicine. That's not gonna—" "Give it to me." Caleb handed her the bottle. Lian's hands shook as she tried to open it, finally managing to get a few drops past Ming's lips. The girl didn't respond. The medicine just pooled in her mouth. "No," Lian whispered. "No, no, please. Ming, wake up. Please wake up." She smoothed the hair back from Ming's forehead, her good hand trembling. Caleb watched, helpless, as Lian bent over her daughter and started speaking rapidly in Chinese. He didn't need translation. He'd said the same things to Sarah. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. Just hold on. Just a little longer." The words never worked. They never had. "Lian," he said gently. "No, she will wake. She will—" "Lian." She looked at him, and the devastation in her face nearly broke him. "I do not know what to do," she said. "I do not know how to save her." Caleb crouched beside her. "Neither do I. But we've got another problem. They're coming." Lian's head snapped up. "Who?" "Hayes. Maybe Fletcher. Others from town. Tonight, probably." "Then we run." "She can't travel. You know that." "Then what?" Caleb looked at Ming, then at Lian, then at the walls of his cabin, thin boards that wouldn't stop a determined man, let alone a mob. "Then we make a choice," he said. "We can try to hide you both, hope they don't search too hard, or I tell them you're staying, that you're under my protection. Draw a line and see if they're willing to cross it." Lian stared at him. "They will cross it. They will kill you. Take us." "Maybe." "You are one man." "Yeah, I keep hearing that." Caleb stood. "But I'm the one man who's here, and I'm the one man who's deciding that they don't get to touch you or your daughter. Not while I'm breathing. This is crazy." "Probably." "You will die for us?" Caleb thought about that. About Sarah's grave out beyond the rise. About 3 years of empty days and emptier nights. About the moment he'd found Ming wandering through his land and made a choice that changed everything. "I'm already dead," he said simply. "Have been for a while. This is just deciding what to do with what's left." Lian's eyes filled with tears. "I do not understand you." "That makes two of us." Outside, the light was fading. Soon it would be dark. Soon they'd come. Caleb checked his pistol, then the rifle, made sure both were loaded. He pulled out boxes of ammunition and set them on the table where he could reach them quickly. Lian watched him prepare for war in his small cabin, and something shifted in her expression. "Caleb," she said. He looked up. "If we die tonight," she said carefully, "I want you to know, you are a good man. Better than you think." "Don't know about that." "I know. I have seen many men, good ones, bad ones, men who say kind words but have cruel hearts, men who say nothing but act with honor." She touched his arm with her good hand. "You are second kind." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if there were words for the feeling in his chest, part gratitude, part grief, part something else entirely. "Take care of her," he said, nodding toward Ming. "Whatever happens, you stay with her. Don't come out unless I say so." "And if you do not say so?" "Then you take the rifle and you run. There's a gully about half a mile north. Follow it east. It'll take you to the river. Cross it and keep going. I will not leave you to—" "You will," Caleb interrupted, "because that's the deal. I protect you and you protect her. Those are the only terms that matter." Lian looked like she wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded once and turned back to her daughter. Caleb positioned himself by the window where he could see the approach to the cabin. Full dark came fast, turning the plains into an ocean of shadows. The stars emerged, cold and distant. He waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Caleb's eyes strained against the darkness, looking for movement. Behind him, he could hear Lian singing softly to Ming. A lullaby, maybe, or a prayer. The melody was haunting, rising and falling like breath. Then he saw them. Torches. Maybe 5 or 6, moving across the plain in a loose group. Close enough now that he could hear voices carrying on the night air. "They're here," he said quietly. Lian's singing stopped. "How many?" "Too many." She didn't ask what that meant. She just gathered Ming closer and watched as Caleb picked up the rifle. The riders drew closer. Caleb could make out faces now in the firelight. Hayes in front, Fletcher beside him. 3 others he didn't recognize, all armed. They stopped about 30 yards from the cabin. Hayes dismounted and walked forward, holding his torch high. "Rourke," he called, "we need to talk." Caleb opened the door and stepped outside, rifle cradled in his arms. "Nothing to talk about, Hayes. Turn around and go home." "Can't do that. We've got questions about your house guests." "Got no house guests." "That's so." Hayes grinned. "Then you won't mind if we come in and look around." "I mind. Get off my property." One of the other men spurred his horse forward. "You're harboring criminals, Rourke. Chinese girl and her mother. Hand them over and there won't be trouble." "And if I don't?" The man's face hardened. "Then we'll take them by force, and you'll hang for helping them." Caleb looked at the 5 men, looked at their weapons, looked at the torches that could burn his cabin to ash in minutes. Then he made his choice. "They're staying," he said clearly. "They're under my roof, which makes them mine to protect. You want them, you'll have to go through me." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Hayes laughed. "You're serious? You're actually going to die for some Chinese woman and her brat? If that's what it takes? You're insane. Been called worse." Hayes's expression shifted, humor draining away. "Last chance, Rourke, step aside." Caleb raised the rifle, aiming it at Hayes's chest. "No." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The torches crackled, the horses shifted. Then Hayes raised his hand and the world exploded into motion. Caleb didn't fire first. That would matter later, if there was a later. He squeezed the trigger half a second after Hayes dropped his hand, aiming low and to the left. The bullet kicked up dirt between Hayes's boots, and the man scrambled backward, cursing. "Next one goes higher," Caleb shouted. One of the riders fired back. The shot went wild, punching through the cabin wall somewhere above the window. Inside, Caleb heard a sharp cry. Lian, but couldn't turn to check. He levered another round and fired at the torch, knocking it from Hayes's grip. The man dove for cover behind his horse. "Take cover!" Fletcher yelled, and the riders scattered. Caleb backed toward the cabin door, keeping the rifle trained on where the men had disappeared into the darkness. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. He'd drawn the line, and now they'd all see if it held. Another shot rang out, hitting the doorframe inches from his head. Splinters stung his cheek. Caleb ducked inside and slammed the door, dropping the bar across it. "You okay?" he called to Lian. "Yes. Ming is still—" Her voice cracked. "Stay down, away from the walls." Caleb moved to the window, careful to stay to the side. Outside, the men were regrouping. He could see them in silhouette against their remaining torches, huddled behind their horses. "Rourke," Hayes's voice carried across the darkness, "you just made this a whole lot worse for yourself." Caleb didn't respond. He was counting. 5 men, 5 horses. Limited ammunition on both sides, probably. They'd try to wait him out or flush him out. Burn the cabin, maybe, if they got desperate enough. He glanced back at Lian. She was crouched on the floor beside the bed, her body curved protectively over Ming. Even in the dim light, he could see her injured arm was bleeding again through the bandage. "There's a root cellar," Caleb said quietly, "under the rug by the stove. If they get in—" "No." Lian's voice was fierce. "We stay together." "Lian, we stay together!" Another gunshot interrupted them. This one shattered the window, glass exploding inward. Caleb threw up an arm to shield his face, felt shards bite into his skin. He dropped below the windowsill and fired back blindly. "You're going to run out of bullets eventually," one of the men yelled. "Then what?" "Then I improvise," Caleb thought grimly. He'd been in worse situations. During the war, there'd been a night when his unit was pinned down by Confederate sharpshooters. They'd lasted until dawn with nothing but 3 rifles and pure stubbornness. Caleb had been 19 then, young enough to think he was invincible. He was 41 now, old enough to know better, but also old enough not to care. "Fletcher," Caleb called out, "this doesn't have to go any further. Take your boys and ride out." A pause. Then Fletcher's voice, uncertain. "You know we can't do that." "Why?" "Because some Chinese kid needs to die to make you feel better about yourself." "It's not about... This is about the law." "The law?" Caleb laughed, harsh and bitter. "There's no law out here except what we make. You know that. This is about you wanting to feel big, wanting to punish someone weaker because you can." Silence. Caleb wondered if his words had landed, if maybe... "Rush him!" Hayes shouted. The riders charged. Caleb saw them coming and fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot took down one of the horses. He hated doing it. The animal hadn't asked for this, and sent its rider tumbling. The second clipped one of the men in the shoulder. He heard the scream, saw the man drop his weapon, but the others kept coming. Caleb dropped the rifle and grabbed his pistol. He fired through the broken window, aiming for center mass. Hit something, someone, heard a grunt of pain. Then they were at the door, slamming against it. The bar held, but the wood groaned. "The cellar!" Caleb yelled at Leon. "Now!" "Not without you." "I'll be right behind you." Another impact on the door. Something cracked. Caleb fired twice more through the wood, heard someone curse. Then his pistol clicked empty. He fumbled for his reload, hands shaking with adrenaline. The door burst open and Hayes was there, gun raised. Time seemed to slow. Caleb saw Hayes' finger tighten on the trigger, saw the muzzle flash. And then Leon was between them. The shot took her in the side. She gasped, stumbled, but stayed on her feet. In her good hand, she held the rifle Caleb had left by the bed. She fired. Hayes went down hard, clutching his leg. The men behind him scattered, diving for cover. Leon worked the lever and fired again, the recoil nearly knocking her over. She missed, but it didn't matter. The message was clear. "Get out!" she screamed. Her English was gone, replaced by Chinese, but the meaning transcended language. Get out or die. Caleb finished reloading and was beside her in 2 steps. He fired over Hayes' head as the man tried to crawl away. "Go, all of you! This is done!" Fletcher appeared in the doorway, his face pale. He looked at Hayes bleeding on the floor, at Leon swaying but defiant, at Caleb with his pistol trained on the next man who moved. "Jesus," Fletcher whispered. "Jesus Christ, what are we doing?" "We're leaving," Caleb said. "You're taking your wounded, and you're leaving, and you're not coming back. Hayes needs to learn when he's beat. Now get him out of here." Fletcher and one of the other men dragged Hayes out. The man was cursing, screaming threats, but his voice got weaker as they hauled him toward the horses. The wounded rider, the one Caleb had shot in the shoulder, limped after them without a word. Within minutes, they were gone. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the night, leaving only silence and smoke and the metallic smell of blood. Caleb lowered his pistol. His hands were shaking. His ears rang from the gunfire. The cabin was destroyed. Bullet holes in the walls, broken glass everywhere, the door hanging on one hinge. Then Leon collapsed. Caleb caught her before she hit the floor. She was frighteningly light in his arms, all bone and will. The blood was spreading across her shirt, dark and wet. "No," Caleb said. No, don't, stay with me. Leanne, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open. "Ming, she's fine, she's right there. You saved her. You saved all of us." Leon's hand found his, gripped it with surprising strength. "Promise. Promise you if I die, you take care of her. You're not dying. I'm not letting you die. Promise. I promise. I swear to you, when you get through this, I'll protect her. Both of you, whatever it takes." Leon's grip loosened. "Good man," she whispered. Then her eyes closed. "No." Caleb shook her gently. "Leon, stay awake, Leanne!" But she was unconscious, her breathing shallow. The wound in her side was bad, really bad. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good, but she was losing blood fast. Caleb laid her carefully on the floor and pressed his hand against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. His mind raced. He needed to stop the bleeding. clean the wound, stitch it closed. He needed supplies he'd just bought, half of which were scattered across the floor now. He needed time he didn't have. "All right," he said aloud, steadying himself. "All right. One thing at a time." He worked through the night. First, he got the bleeding under control using pressure and strips torn from his last clean shirt. Then he moved Lian to the bed. Ming was still there, still breathing somehow, still hanging on, and began the delicate work of cleaning the gunshot wound. The carbolic acid burned. Lian jerked and cried out even in unconsciousness. Caleb kept working, his hand steady despite the exhaustion pulling at him. He'd done this before. During the war, he'd assisted the company surgeon, holding men down while bullets were dug out or limbs sawed off. He'd learned things he'd tried to forget but never could. Now those memories kept Lian alive. He stitched the wound closed with thread he boiled first. Small, careful stitches, the way the surgeon had shown him. His hands cramped, but he didn't stop. When he was done, he bandaged it and moved to her arm, removing the ruined dressing and cleaning that wound too. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking through the shattered window. Caleb sat back and looked at his work. 2 women in his bed, both dying. One from fever, one from a bullet she'd taken for him. The cabin around them was a wreck, and somewhere out there, Hayes and his men were probably planning round 2. He should have been terrified. Should have been thinking about how to get out, get away, survive. Instead, he was thinking about coffee. He stood on legs that barely held him and got the stove going. The coffee was bitter when it was done, but it was hot, and it was something. He sat at the table with his cup and stared at nothing. What the hell had he done? He'd shot at townsmen. Probably killed one of their horses. Definitely wounded at least 2 men. All to protect 2 strangers who'd stumbled into his life less than a week ago. Sarah would have been proud. Or she would have called him an idiot. Maybe both. Caleb rubbed his face, feeling the stubble rough under his palms. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His body ached. His hands were covered in blood. Lian's blood. And he couldn't remember when he'd last eaten. But Ming was still breathing. Lian was still breathing. And the sun was coming up on another day. That had to count for something. He was on his 2nd cup of coffee when he heard it. Soft, barely audible. A cough. Caleb's head snapped toward the bed. Ming was moving. Actually moving, shifting beneath the blanket. Her eyes were open, unfocused, but open. He was across the room in 3 strides. Hey, you're awake. Ming blinked slowly. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Don't try to talk, Caleb said. He grabbed the water jug and carefully tipped some into her mouth. She drank desperately, coughing, then drank more. Easy, slow. When she'd had enough, she looked around the cabin with confused eyes. Then she saw Lian beside her, pale and still, and terror flooded her face. Mama, Ming whispered. The word was cracked, hoarse, but understandable. She's okay, Caleb said quickly. She's hurt, but she's going to be okay. You both are. Ming reached out with a trembling hand and touched Lian's face. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She said something in Chinese, urgent and pleading. I don't understand, Caleb said helplessly. I don't... But Ming wasn't listening. She was crying now, full sobs that shook her small frame. She curled against her mother, careful of the bandages, and wept. Caleb stepped back, giving them space. Or giving them the illusion of space, since they were all crammed into his one-room cabin. He went back to the table and his coffee, letting Ming cry herself out. After a while, the sobs quieted. Ming's breathing evened out. She'd fallen asleep again, exhausted from the effort of consciousness. But the fever was gone. Caleb could tell from across the room. The grayish tint had left her skin. Her breathing was deeper, steadier. She was going to live. 1 down, 1 to go. Caleb checked on Lian. Her pulse was weak but present. Her skin was hot but not burning. The bandages were holding, no fresh blood seeping through. He allowed himself a moment of hope. Then he heard the horses. Caleb grabbed his pistol. He'd reloaded it hours ago and moved to the window. 3 riders this time, approaching slowly. He recognized one of them immediately. Doc Wilson. The other 2 were strangers, but they didn't have the look of Hayes' crew. They rode with their hands visible, no weapons drawn. Rourke, Doc Wilson called when they were close enough. I'm here to help. Fletcher sent me. Caleb stepped outside, gun ready but not aimed. That's so? Hayes is in bad shape. Lianzhou shot him in the femoral artery. If I hadn't gotten there when I did, Wilson shook his head. He's alive, but barely. Fletcher told me what happened, the whole story. And? And Fletcher's had a change of heart. Said to tell you he's done. No more trouble from him or any man he can speak for. Wilson gestured at his companions. These are friends, good men. They think what Hayes tried to do was wrong. Caleb studied them. Wilson looked sober for once, his hands steady. The other two had open faces, nervous but sincere. Why should I believe you? Because I'm a doctor, Wilson said simply. And because Fletcher said the Chinese woman was shot. If she's still alive, she needs help. That's all I care about. Caleb made a decision. He lowered the gun. She's inside. Took a bullet in the side. I stitched it, but you're not a surgeon. Yeah. Let me take a look. Wilson dismounted and followed Caleb into the cabin. The doctor's eyes widened when he saw the damage. Bullet holes, broken glass, blood on the floor. But he went straight to the bed and examined Leanne with professional efficiency. You did good work here, Wilson said after a minute. Real good. Probably saved her life. Is she going to make it? If infection doesn't set in, and if she rests, no moving, no stress. I'll leave you some things that'll help. Wilson glanced at Ming. This the daughter? Yeah, she just woke up. Fever broke this morning. Small miracles. Wilson pulled supplies from his bag and went to work rebandaging Lyon's wounds with proper materials. Fletcher wanted me to tell you something else. What? Hayes is leaving the territory. Soon as he can travel, he's gone. Fletcher's making sure of it. Said Hayes brought shame on the town, attacking a man's home over nothing. Over nothing? Caleb's voice came out flat. That what he's calling it? Wilson's hands paused. Fletcher's not perfect, but he's trying to make it right. That's more than most men would do. I suppose. They worked in silence for a while. Wilson finished with Lian and checked Ming, declaring her out of danger but needing careful feeding and rest. He left bottles and instructions, refused payment when Caleb offered, and stood to leave. One more thing, Wilson said at the door. Town's going to talk. About you. About them. It won't all be kind. Let them talk. You're sure about this? About taking them in? Caleb looked at Ming sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Looked at Lian, pale but alive, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Yeah, he said, I'm sure. Wilson nodded slowly. Then I'll do what I can to quiet the worst of it. Can't promise much, but I'll try. Appreciate it. After Wilson and his companions left, Caleb bolted the broken door as best he could and collapsed into his chair. His body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Every muscle ached, his eyes burned. But he'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, they'd all made it through. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, someone was touching his arm. Caleb jerked awake, hand going for his pistol. Pa? He froze. Looked down. Ming stood beside him, swaying slightly. She was wearing his old shirt like a dress, the hem dragging on the floor. Her eyes were huge in her small face. Pa? She said again, uncertain. The word hit Caleb like a physical blow. Pa. Not father, not the Chinese word for it, but the simple English word a child would use. Pa. I'm not. His voice failed him. Ming tilted her head, confused. Then she pointed at Lian. Mama, then at herself. Ming, then at Caleb, and her face broke into a tentative smile. Pa. Something cracked open in Caleb's chest, something he'd sealed away after Sarah died, after the baby died. He'd told himself he was done with family, done with caring, done with all of it. But here was this child, this survivor, claiming him as her own. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. Yeah, okay, Pa. Ming's smile widened. She climbed into his lap carefully, like she wasn't sure if it was allowed, and curled against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. Her hair smelled like fever sweat and the soap he'd used to wash it. Caleb's arms came up around her automatically. He held her while she dozed, this child who'd decided he was hers. And maybe, he thought, maybe she was right. 2 days passed. Lian woke on the second day, groggy but coherent. The first thing she did was look for Ming. The second thing was try to sit up. The third thing was pass out when the pain hit. You need to stay down, Caleb said when she woke again. Doctor's orders. Ming is fine. She's eating, playing, driving me crazy asking questions I can't understand. Caleb helped her drink some water. You saved her life, Lian. The fever broke. She's going to be okay. Lian's eyes filled with tears. You are sure? I'm sure. She sagged back against the pillow. And you are hurt? Couple of cuts, nothing serious. The men who came, gone, won't be back. Lian studied his face. You are not telling me something. Caleb sighed. Hayes might die from what you did to him. Wilson got him stable, but it's touch and go. He expected fear or regret. Instead, Lian's jaw set. Good. He tried to kill us. He deserved what he got. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people are not me. She shifted, winced. How long I am here? In bed? As long as it takes. You lost a lot of blood, Lian. You try to move too soon, you'll tear those stitches and we'll be back where we started. But Ming is fine. I'm watching her. She's eating, sleeping, getting stronger every day. She calls you Pa now, Lian said quietly. Yeah, that happened. You mind? Did he? Caleb thought about it. About Ming's small hand in his, about the trust in her eyes when she looked at him, about the weight of responsibility settling on shoulders that hadn't carried anything meaningful in 3 years. No, he said finally. I don't mind. Lian smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face, made her look younger, less burdened. Good, she said, because I think she has decided. You are her Pa now, no changing her mind. Stubborn is she. Like her mother, they shared a look, and in that moment something shifted between them. Not romance. It was too early for that, too complicated. But recognition, understanding, the kind of bond formed when people survive something terrible together. Thank you, Lian said, for everything, for finding Ming, for keeping us safe, for, her voice caught, for not leaving us to die. Thank you for taking a bullet, Caleb said. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. You would have died. Maybe. Not maybe. He would have killed you. I could not. She looked away. I could not watch another good man die. Not when I could stop it. Caleb wanted to ask about the other good man, the one who died during the bandit attack. Wanted to know about Lian's husband, about their life before everything fell apart. But it wasn't the time. Maybe it never would be. You should rest, he said instead. I should help. Lian, rest. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Okay, but tomorrow I help. We'll see. She was asleep again within minutes. Caleb checked her bandages, no fresh bleeding, and went to find Ming. The girl was outside, sitting in the dirt near the well. She'd found some of Caleb's tools and was arranging them in patterns, narrating something to herself in Chinese. She looked up when he approached and grinned. Pa, look! She showed him her arrangement, wrenches and hammers laid out like a fence. That's real nice, Caleb said, even though he had no idea what it was supposed to be. Ming chattered at him in Chinese, pointing at different tools. Caleb nodded along, catching maybe one word in 10. After a while, Ming seemed to realize he didn't understand. She thought for a moment, then pointed at the tools and said carefully, Home. Home, Caleb repeated. Yes, Ming pointed at the cabin. Home. She'd built a fence around a small cleared space. Protecting it, Caleb realized. Making it safe. Yeah, he said quietly. Home. Ming went back to her building, humming something that might have been the lullaby Lian had sung. Caleb watched her for a while, this child who'd survived things that would have broken most adults, who'd walked across miles of brutal territory alone and somehow lived, who'd decided against all logic that this broken-down rancher was someone worth trusting. The sun was warm on his back. The plains stretched out in every direction, brown and endless and honest. In the distance, he could see weather moving in. Dark clouds on the horizon, the promise of rain, or maybe the first snow of the season. Winter was coming. They'd need to prepare. Fix the cabin properly, stock up on supplies, figure out how 3 people could live in a space meant for one. 3 people. When had that happen? When had he stopped thinking of them as temporary, as problems to solve, and started thinking of them as his? Maybe when Ming called him Pa. Maybe when Lian took that bullet. Maybe the moment he'd pulled a dying child onto his horse and made the choice that changed everything. Didn't matter when. What mattered was now, and now meant figuring out how to keep them safe, keep them fed, keep them together. Pa! Ming called. She'd moved on from her fence project and was trying to lift a bucket from the well. The bucket was half her size. Hold on. I'm coming. Caleb crossed the yard and helped her pull up the bucket. Ming drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. When she was done, she looked up at him with those serious dark eyes. Good? She asked in English. Yeah, Caleb said. Good. She took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around 2 of his, and led him back to the cabin. At the door, she looked up at him again. Home, she said firmly. Home, Caleb agreed. And for the first time in 3 years, he meant it. The standoff dissolved into chaos before Caleb could process what was happening. Hayes's hand dropped, and someone fired, not at Caleb, but into the air, a warning shot that cracked across the night like breaking bone. The horses spooked, and in the confusion of stamping hooves and shouted curses, Caleb saw his moment. He didn't shoot Hayes. He shot the ground 3 feet in front of the man's boots. Dirt exploded upward. Hayes stumbled backward, and the other men scattered, some diving for cover behind their horses, others trying to control their mounts. Caleb worked the rifle's action and fired again, this time at the torch Hayes had dropped. It went flying, landing in the dirt and guttering out. Next one goes through flesh, Caleb shouted. Get off my land! For a moment he thought they might actually leave. Fletcher was already backing his horse away, his face pale in the remaining torchlight. One of the other men had lost his weapon in the scramble and was frantically searching the ground for it, but Hayes recovered fast. Too fast. You just made the worst mistake of your life, Hayes snarled. He'd drawn his pistol, and now he aimed it at the cabin. Not at Caleb. At the cabin where Lian and Ming were hiding. Don't, Caleb said. The word came out flat and cold. Hayes's finger tightened on the trigger. Caleb shot him. The bullet took Hayes in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, his pistol flying from his hand. The other men froze, staring at their fallen companion, then at Caleb. Anyone else? Caleb asked. His voice was steady, but his heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. No one moved. Hayes was on his knees, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. He looked up at Caleb with something between shock and fury. You shot me, Hayes said, like he couldn't quite believe it. You aimed at innocent people. I'd do it again. Fletcher finally found his voice. Rourke, you need to... I need to what? Caleb swung the rifle toward Fletcher, who immediately raised his hands. Tell me, Tom, what exactly do I need to do? Let you burn down my cabin? Let you take a woman and her dying child? Which part of that sounds reasonable to you? The law says a man's got a right to defend his property and the people under his protection. That's exactly what I'm doing. She's Chinese. She's a person. The words came out louder than Caleb intended, echoing across the empty land. She's a person who's already lost everything. Her husband's dead, her child's dying. And you want to come out here and take what little she's got left because why? Because she looks different? Because she speaks a different language? Fletcher's jaw worked. Town won't stand for this. Then the town's got a problem. Because I'm not moving. They stay. Under my roof, they're mine to protect, and I'll shoot the next man who tries to tell me different. One of the other riders, a younger man Caleb didn't recognize, spoke up. He's just one guy. You could what? Caleb asked. Rush me? Maybe one of you gets me before I get 2 of you. Want to volunteer to be first? The young man shut up. Hayes struggled to his feet, still holding his shoulder. His face was twisted with pain and rage. This isn't over, Rourke. You just signed your own death warrant. Then I'll die on my feet defending what's right. Better than living on my knees doing what's easy. Hayes spat blood into the dirt. You're going to regret this. I regret a lot of things. This won't be one of them. Fletcher helped Hayes onto his horse. The wounded man swayed in the saddle but stayed upright. The other riders gathered their courage and their weapons, casting dark looks at Caleb. "You've got until morning to reconsider," Fletcher said. "After that, we're coming back with the sheriff. Maybe the marshal, too. They'll drag you and your Chinese friends to town, and there won't be anything romantic about it." "I'll be here," Caleb said. The riders turned and melted into the darkness, their torches bobbing like fireflies. Caleb stood outside his cabin, rifle still raised, until the last light disappeared over the rise. Then his knees nearly gave out. He caught himself against the doorframe, his whole body shaking with adrenaline. He just shot a man. Actually shot him. In all his years, through the war and everything after, he'd never shot someone outside of battle, and now he'd done it defending people he'd known for less than a week. "Caleb?" He turned. Leanne stood in the doorway, her face ghostly in the dim light from inside. She was holding Ming against her chest, the girl wrapped in the blanket. "Is over?" Leanne asked. "For now. The man you shot will live. Probably wish he hadn't, but he'll live." Caleb pushed himself upright and moved past her into the cabin. His hands were still trembling as he set the rifle down. Leanne followed him inside and closed the door. "They will come back." "Yeah. With more men." "Probably." "Then we must go. Tonight. While we can." Caleb turned to look at Ming, still limp in her mother's arms. "She won't make it. You know that. Move her now, and she dies for sure." "If we stay, we all die." "Maybe. Or maybe we fight." Leanne's expression hardened. "You cannot fight whole town. You are—" "I'm one man, I know. Everyone keeps reminding me." Caleb rubbed his face, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. "But I'm one man with a defensible position and enough ammunition to make anyone think twice. And I'm one man who's already decided he's not backing down." "Why?" The word came out sharp. "Why you do this? You do not owe us anything. We are strangers. You could have turned away, should have turned away, but instead you—" She gestured helplessly at the cabin, at everything that had just happened. "You shoot a man for us. You make yourself enemy of whole town." "Why?" Caleb sank into the chair, suddenly too tired to stand. "You want the truth?" "Yes." "Because when Sarah was dying, I rode for help. Rode as hard as I could, but the doctor was in the next county, and by the time I got back with him, she was already gone. I was too late, too slow. And for 3 years I've been living with that, knowing I could have done more, should have done more." He looked up at Leanne. "I can't save Sarah, can't bring back my baby. But I can save you and Ming. Maybe. If I'm fast enough this time. Brave enough. So yeah, I shot Hayes. And I'd shoot a dozen more if it meant not having to bury another person I could have helped." Leanne was quiet for a long time. Ming stirred slightly in her arms, a tiny whimper escaping her lips. "You're Sarah," Leanne said finally. "She would be proud of you. Or she'd call me an idiot and tell me to run while I still could." "No, she would be proud." Leanne moved to the bed and laid Ming down gently. "I am proud and grateful. And—" She struggled with the English, her brow furrowing. "Afraid for you, all at once." "Join the club," Caleb muttered. He spent the rest of the night preparing. He moved furniture to barricade the door and windows. He checked every weapon, made sure everything was loaded and within reach. He filled every container he had with water in case they ended up under siege. Leanne watched him work, occasionally helping when he needed an extra pair of hands. Her injured arm was getting worse. He could see it in the way she moved, the careful way she held it, but she didn't complain. Around 3 a.m, Ming's fever spiked again. Her small body convulsed, and Leanne had to hold her down to keep her from hurting herself. Caleb brought cold water, and together they worked to bring the temperature down. "Please," Leanne whispered, pressing a damp cloth to Ming's forehead. "Please, Ming, stay with me. Just stay with me." The convulsions gradually subsided, leaving Ming limp and barely breathing. Caleb checked her pulse, thready and weak, but still there. "She's fighting," he said. "Fighting is not always enough." "No, but it's something." Dawn came gray and cold. Caleb stood at the window, watching the horizon for riders. His eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, and his body ached from tension. But his mind was clear, focused. They'd come today. He was sure of it. The only question was how many. Behind him, Lian had finally dozed off in the chair, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck sore when she woke. Ming lay in the bed, her breathing so shallow it was hard to tell if she was alive until you got close. Caleb made coffee, mostly to have something to do with his hands. The smell filled the cabin, rich and bitter. He was pouring a cup when he saw the dust, a lot of dust. "Lian," he said quietly. "They're coming." She was awake instantly, on her feet and moving to the window. "How many?" "Can't tell yet, more than last night." As they watched, the riders took shape. 10, maybe 12, some on horseback, others in a wagon. At the front, easily recognizable even at a distance, was Fletcher on his gray mare. "They brought everyone," Lian said. "Looks like." They watched the group approach until they were close enough to make out faces. Fletcher was there, along with the men from last night. But there were others too, shopkeepers, farmers, men Caleb had seen in passing but never spoken to. A few had rifles. All looked determined. The wagon stopped about 50 yards out, and a man climbed down from the driver's seat. He was older, maybe 60, with a silver badge pinned to his vest. "That the sheriff?" Lian asked. "Yeah, Sam Cooper. He's not a bad man. But he's not going to go against the whole town either." Cooper walked forward, hands visible and empty. When he was close enough to be heard without shouting, he stopped. "Caleb Rourke," he called. "I need to talk to you." Caleb opened the door but stayed inside, rifle in hand. "I'm listening." "You know why we're here." "I've got a pretty good idea. Tom Fletcher says you've got a Chinese woman and her daughter in there. Says you shot Bill Hayes when he tried to bring them in." "Hayes aimed a weapon at my cabin, at innocent people. I defended my property." Cooper nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. "That may be, but the woman and her child need to come with us. There's been complaints. Town doesn't want them here. Town doesn't have a say in who I let on my property." "Actually, it does. We've got laws about harboring Chinese workers without proper documentation. You know that." "I know a lot of laws get real flexible depending on who's involved," Caleb shot back. "I also know there's laws about a man's right to defend his home and protect people under his roof. I'm standing on my property, defending my family. That's legal as it gets." "Your family?" Cooper's eyebrows rose. "Caleb, you've known these people less than a week. Family's not about blood, it's about choice. I choose to protect them. That makes them mine." There was murmuring among the men behind Cooper. Some of it sounded angry. Some of it sounded uncertain. Cooper sighed. "Caleb, I've known you for 3 years. You're a good man, a quiet man. This isn't like you. Maybe I'm tired of being quiet. Even if it means dying, because that's where this is headed. You shoot at any more of these men, and I can't protect you. They'll string you up, and they'll take that woman and child anyway. Is that what you want?" Caleb looked past Cooper at the assembled men. Some looked eager. Some looked uncomfortable. A few wouldn't meet his eyes. "What I want," Caleb said clearly, "is for people to leave well enough alone. That woman's husband was murdered. Her child is dying. They've got nothing and no one. And all I'm doing is giving them a place to rest until they can figure out what comes next. That's it. No crime in that." "There's crime in shooting people," Cooper said. "There's crime in letting innocent people die when you could help them." Another murmur from the crowd. This one sounded different, less certain. Cooper seemed to sense the shift too. "Look, Caleb, here's what I can offer. You send the woman and child out. We'll make sure they get to the next town safely. Put them on a wagon heading east. They'll be out of your hair and out of our town. Everybody wins." "Except them," Caleb said. "Child can't travel. She's got fever that'll kill her if she's moved. Doctor wouldn't recommend it." "We don't have a doctor here." "Which is why she's staying put until she's strong enough to move on her own." Cooper's patience was wearing thin. Caleb could see it in the set of his jaw. "You're putting me in a bad position, Caleb. That makes 2 of us. I've got a dozen armed men here. You've got a rifle and whatever ammunition you can reach. This doesn't end well for you." "Maybe not, but I'm not the one who'll have to explain why we killed a man for protecting a woman and child. You willing to carry that the rest of your life, Sam?" The sheriff's face tightened. For a moment, Caleb thought he might actually be getting through. Then Fletcher pushed forward, his face red. "This is ridiculous," Fletcher shouted. Cooper, we're wasting time. The man shot Hayes. He's harboring fugitives. Just go in there and drag them out. I'm trying to do this peacefully, Tom. Peaceful time is over. You want us to do your job for you? Fletcher turned to the assembled men. Who's with me? Who's ready to remind Rourke what happens when you break the law in this territory? A few men stirred. One raised his rifle. Another nodded. But then someone unexpected spoke up. This ain't right. Everyone turned. An older man had stepped forward from the back of the group. Caleb recognized him. Henry Worth, a farmer who lived a few miles outside town. Worth's face was weathered and serious. What did you say? Fletcher asked. I said this ain't right. We came out here to uphold the law, not murder a man for showing mercy. It's not murder, it's what, Tom? Justice? Killing a man and taking a dying child from her mother? That's justice to you? Fletcher's mouth opened and closed. They're Chinese, Henry. They don't belong here. Maybe, maybe not. But that's not for us to decide by violence. If Rourke wants to help them, that's his business. His land, his choice. Another voice joined in, a younger man, maybe 20. Mr. Worth's right. My pa always said a man's home is his castle. Can't just storm it because we don't like his guests. They're not guests, they're people, another man interrupted. Just people. And I didn't ride out here to kill over people. The tide was turning. Caleb could feel it. Fletcher felt it too, his face getting redder. You're all cowards, Fletcher spat. Too scared to do what needs doing. Or maybe we're smart enough to know when to walk away, Worth said. He looked at Cooper. Sheriff, I'm going home. My conscience is clear. Can you say the same? Cooper's jaw worked. He looked at the cabin, at Caleb, at the men behind him, who were increasingly uncertain. Finally, he shook his head. All right, Cooper said. We're leaving, but Rourke, he pointed at the cabin. This isn't over. Town council's going to want to talk to you, and if that child dies, there'll be questions. She's not going to die, Caleb said, though he had no idea if that was true. For your sake, I hope you're right. Cooper turned and started walking back to the wagon. Worth followed, then the young man, then others. Fletcher stood alone, fists clenched. This is wrong, Fletcher said, but there was no heat in it anymore, just bitterness. No, Cooper said. What would be wrong is killing a man for having a heart. Come on, Tom, let's go. Slowly, reluctantly, the group dispersed. Some mounted their horses. Others climbed into the wagon. Within minutes, they were all riding back toward town, leaving nothing but dust and hoofprints. Caleb stayed in the doorway until they were completely out of sight. Then he closed the door, leaned against it, and slid to the floor. Leon was beside him in an instant. They're gone? Yeah. They will come back? Probably, but not today. Maybe not tomorrow either. He looked at her. You and Ming bought some time. What we do with it is up to us. Lian sat beside him on the floor. They were close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. Thank you, she said quietly, for standing, for fighting, for... She couldn't find the English words, so she just touched his arm. Caleb covered her hand with his. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You risk everything. For us. For what's right, he corrected. Then, softer. For you. The words hung in the air between them. Lian's breath caught. When Caleb looked at her, he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tight. Recognition, gratitude, and something deeper. Something he hadn't felt or allowed himself to feel in 3 years. Caleb, she said, and it wasn't a question or a statement, just his name, spoken like a promise. He started to respond, to say something that might make sense of the feeling building in his chest, when Ming made a sound. Both of them were on their feet instantly, rushing to the bed. Ming's eyes were open, actually open and focused for the first time in days. She looked at her mother, then at Caleb, confusion written across her small face. Mama? She whispered. Lian made a sound like a sob and a laugh combined. She gathered Ming into her arms, careful of the girl's fragile state, and held her like she'd never let go. Yes, baby. Mama is here. Mama is here. Ming said something in Chinese, her voice weak but audible. Lian responded, and they went back and forth while Caleb watched, feeling something break open inside his chest. She was awake. She was talking. The fever was breaking. After 3 years of watching people die, of being too late and too slow and too powerless, he'd actually saved someone. The feeling was so overwhelming he had to turn away, blinking hard against the sudden burn in his eyes. Caleb. Leon's voice was soft. When he looked back, she was crying, but she was smiling too. She asked who you are. What did you tell her? Leon said something in Chinese to Ming, and the girl looked at Caleb with those dark, serious eyes. Then she said something that made Leon's breath catch. What did she say? Caleb asked. Leanne wiped her eyes. She say you are the man who saved us. She say you are... Leon struggled with the translation, then gave up and just said it. She call you Baba. It mean father. The word hit Caleb like a physical blow. He stared at Ming, at this small girl who'd stumbled into his life less than a week ago and turned everything upside down. She was looking at him with something like trust, like hope. I'm not, he started, then stopped. Because maybe he was. Not by blood, not by any traditional definition, but by choice. By the decision to stand between her and the world. By the willingness to die to keep her safe. Wasn't that what fathers did? Tell her, Caleb said, his voice rough. Tell her I'm honored. Leon translated. Ming's face broke into a weak smile, the first real expression Caleb had seen on her face. Then her eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling her back under. Is normal? Leon asked anxiously. The sleeping? Yeah, fever's breaking. Her body needs rest to heal. Just keep her warm and make sure she drinks when she wakes up. Leon nodded and settled beside her daughter, one hand resting on Ming's chest to feel the steady rise and fall of breathing. Caleb moved to the window and looked out at the empty land. Somewhere out there, Fletcher and Hayes and the others were nursing their anger and their wounded pride. Somewhere out there, decisions were being made about what to do with the man who'd defied the town. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. He'd drawn his line, made his stand, and against all odds, they'd survived it. The question was what came next. Caleb turned back to watch Leon with Ming, the two of them curled together on his narrow bed. They looked so small in the rough cabin, so out of place, but also somehow like they belonged, like they'd always belonged. The realization hit him slowly, not as a shock, but as a gradual dawning. Somewhere in the chaos of the last few days, his empty cabin had stopped being a tomb and started being a home. The silence he'd wrapped himself in had been broken by voices. Leon's halting English, Ming's rare words, even his own voice talking more than it had in years. He was alive again. Actually, genuinely alive, not just existing. And it terrified him. Caleb. Leon's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Come here. He crossed to the bed. Ming was asleep again, her breathing easier now. Leon patted the edge of the mattress. Sit. You need rest too. I'm fine. You are not fine. You are... She gestured at all of him, falling down tired. Sit. He sat. The mattress creaked under his weight. Leon shifted to make room, careful not to disturb Ming. When I was young, Leon said quietly, my father tell me story about man who try to hold back river with his hands. Every day water come. Every day man push back. People say he is crazy. Water is too strong. But man does not stop. He build dam, one stone at time. River fight him. People mock him. But he continue. And one day, dam is finished. River is stopped. Village is saved. She looked at Caleb. You are like that man. You try to hold back river of hate with your hands. People say you're crazy, but you do not stop. River usually wins, Caleb said. Maybe. But sometimes, man who fight river, he inspire others to build dam with him. Like today, the men who spoke for you. You give them courage to do right thing. Or I just got lucky. No, not luck. You show them what honor looks like, what standing for something means. She touched his face, her hand gentle. You save us, Caleb, more than you know. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he hadn't saved anyone, that they were all still in danger, and this was just a temporary reprieve. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself leaning into her touch, this simple moment of connection after so many years alone. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. Any of this. I'm just making it up as I go. That is how all of us live, making it up, hoping we do not fail. I failed before. Yes, me too. But we are still here, still fighting. That is what matters. Ming stirred between them, murmuring something in her sleep. Lian smoothed her hair back and Caleb watched the tender gesture, his throat tight. When she's better, he said, where will you go? Lian was quiet for a long moment. I do not know. Railroad is finished. No work for Chinese. Towns do not want us. Maybe we go west. Find other Chinese families. Maybe we... She trailed off. Maybe you stay, Caleb finished. She looked at him sharply. Stay? Here? Why not? I've got land. Not much, but enough. Room in the cabin if we build another bed. Could use help with the ranch, and Ming needs stability to get strong again. Town will not accept this. Town doesn't get a vote. This is my land. My choice. He met her eyes. Unless you don't want to stay. Want? Lian laughed, but there was no humor in it. What I want does not matter. What matters is keeping Ming safe, giving her chance to grow, to live. She paused. But yes, I want to stay. I want... She struggled with the words, then gave up and just said it. I want this. You, Ming, me. This family we make from broken pieces. I want it very much. The honesty in her voice made something shift in Caleb's chest. This wasn't about convenience or necessity anymore. This was about choosing each other, about taking 3 separate lives torn apart by loss and violence and seeing if they could build something new. Then stay, he said. Stay and let's figure out how to make this work. Lian's eyes filled with tears. You are sure? No, I'm terrified, but I'm sure I want to try. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, Ming sleeping peacefully between them. Okay, Lian whispered. We stay. We try. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. Somewhere out there, trouble was still brewing. Fletcher wouldn't give up easily. Hayes would want revenge. The town council would have opinions. But for now, in the small cabin on the empty plains, 3 people who had no business being together had found something worth fighting for. A family, strange and patched together and fragile as glass, but a family nonetheless. And Caleb Rourke, who'd spent 3 years trying to die inside his own skin, discovered that he very much wanted to live after all. Ming's recovery was slow and uneven, like watching spring arrive in Wyoming. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, with sudden cold snaps that made you wonder if winter would ever really end. The first week after her fever broke, she mostly slept. When she was awake, she'd watch Caleb and Lian with those dark, careful eyes, taking everything in but saying little. Len would coax her to eat broth and soft bread, speaking in gentle Chinese, and Ming would obey with the quiet compliance of someone who'd learned early that survival meant not making trouble. It broke Caleb's heart every time he saw it. By the second week, Ming was sitting up on her own. Her appetite returned in fits and starts. Some days she'd eat everything offered. Other days she'd push the bowl away after 2 bites. But she was gaining weight, her face filling out, the gray tint leaving her skin. Lian's arm was healing too, though it would never be quite right. The infection had done damage, and even after Caleb cleaned and dressed it properly, she couldn't lift anything heavy without wincing. She tried to hide it, but Caleb noticed. He noticed everything about her now. The way she hummed while she worked. The careful way she braided Ming's hair each morning. How she'd stand at this window sometimes, staring out at the endless plains with an expression he couldn't quite read. Loss, maybe? Or longing? Or just the weight of everything she'd survived. They'd fallen into a rhythm, the 3 of them. Caleb would wake before dawn and get the stove going. Lian would rise shortly after and start breakfast while he tended to Rust and check the property. Ming would emerge last, moving slowly, still regaining her strength. They ate together, worked together, existed in the same space with a careful politeness that felt like they were all waiting for something to break. The town left them alone. No riders appeared on the horizon, no more threats. But Caleb knew it wasn't over. It was never over. Towns had long memories, and people like Fletcher didn't forget being defied. He was proven right on a cold morning 3 weeks after the standoff. Caleb was outside splitting wood when he saw the dust. Just one rider this time, moving at an easy pace. He grabbed his rifle and positioned himself where he could see clearly. The rider resolved into someone he recognized, Henry Worth, the farmer who'd spoken up during the standoff. Worth raised one hand in greeting as he approached. "Caleb," he called. "It's just me. Need to talk." Caleb lowered the rifle but didn't set it down. "Talk from there." Worth stopped his horse about 20 feet away and dismounted slowly, making his movements obvious. "Fair enough. Don't blame you for being cautious. What do you want, Henry?" "To warn you. Town council met yesterday. Fletcher's been pushing hard to do something about your situation. Says you're harboring fugitives. That you shot Hayes without proper cause." Worth shifted his weight. "He's calling for the marshal to come down from Cheyenne." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Marshal's going to take Fletcher's word for it?" "Don't know. But Fletcher's making a lot of noise, and there's folks in town who agree with him. Not all of us, mind. Some of us remember what we saw that day. A man defending his property, and two people who'd already suffered enough. But Fletcher's loud and loud tends to win in small towns. So what are you suggesting?" Worth looked uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not saying you should leave, but maybe having that woman and child visible around town might help. Let people see they're just regular folks. Might take the wind out of Fletcher's sails. Or might give him a target. That's possible too. But right now they're ghosts. Stories Fletcher can shape however he wants. If people actually meet them, see that little girl." Worth trailed off. "Might change some minds." Caleb considered it. The idea of bringing Leanne and Ming into town made his skin crawl. Too many variables. Too many chances for things to go wrong. But Worth had a point. As long as they stayed hidden, Fletcher controlled the narrative. "I'll think about it," Caleb said. Worth nodded. "That's all I'm asking. One more thing. Doc Wilson's been asking after the girl. Says he'd come out and check on her if you'd allow it. No charge. Just wants to make sure she's healing proper." That surprised Caleb. Wilson was a drunk, but he'd been a good doctor once before whatever had driven him to the bottle. Why would he do that? "Because he's still got some decency left, I reckon. Same reason some of us spoke up that day. We might live in a hard place, but that doesn't mean we have to be hard people." Worth mounted his horse. "Think about it, Caleb, and watch your back. Fletcher's not done." He rode off before Caleb could respond. Inside, Leanne was teaching Ming to read English using an old newspaper Caleb had found in his belongings. They looked up as he entered, and something in his face made Leanne stand. "What is wrong?" Caleb set the rifle down and told them about Worth's visit. Leanne's expression grew darker with each word. "He wants us to go to town," she said flatly, "to show we are not threat. He thinks it might help. Or might get us killed. Yeah, that too." Caleb sat at the table. "But he's not wrong about Fletcher controlling the story. Long as you're hidden, you're whatever he says you are." Leanne looked at Ming, who was watching them with those serious eyes. "What you think we should do?" It was the first time she'd asked his opinion instead of just stating her own. The trust implicit in that question made Caleb's chest tight. "I think," he said slowly, "that hiding never solved anything, and I think maybe it's time people saw what I see when I look at you two." "What you see?" "A woman who's survived hell and kept her daughter alive through sheer will. A kid who's tougher than most grown men I've known. People worth fighting for." He met Leanne's eyes. Worth standing beside. Something passed between them. A moment of understanding that went beyond words. "Okay," Leanne said. "We go, but you stay close." "Always." They went to town the next Sunday, timing it for when most people would be gathered at the church. Caleb figured if they had to face the town, might as well do it when everyone was supposedly thinking about mercy and forgiveness. The irony wasn't lost on him. Ming rode in front of Caleb on Rust, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. She'd been nervous about the horse at first, but Caleb had spent the last few days getting her comfortable with Rust, and now she sat with the quiet confidence of someone determined not to show fear. Leanne rode behind them on the old mare Caleb had bought from a neighbor, her injured arm held close. She'd braided her hair and wore the cleanest dress Caleb had, another of his old shirts, but she'd somehow made it look almost proper. The town was exactly as Caleb remembered it: small, dusty, ordinary. A few people were milling around outside the church when they rode up. The conversation stopped. Heads turned. Caleb dismounted and helped Ming down, then offered his hand to Lian. She took it, and he was surprised by how natural it felt to stand beside her, Ming between them. They made quite a picture, he imagined. The hermit rancher, the Chinese woman, and the small girl. Everything the town feared and resented, all wrapped up in three people who just wanted to be left alone. The church door opened and people started filing out. Caleb recognized most of them. Fletcher, obviously, Cooper, Worth, and his wife. The young man who'd spoken up during the standoff. Others he'd seen but never spoken to. Fletcher's face went red when he saw them. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Rourke?" "Going to church," Caleb said evenly. "That allowed? With them? You can't just..." "Can't just what, Tom? Bring people to worship? Thought that was the whole point of church." A few people behind Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. Worth's wife actually smiled, though she tried to hide it. Cooper stepped forward. "Caleb, maybe this isn't the best time." "When's a better time, Sam? When Fletcher's done spreading lies about who these people are. They're fugitives. They're a woman and child who've lost everything." Caleb's voice carried across the small crowd. "Her husband was murdered. Her daughter was dying. All I did was give them a place to heal. That's it. No crime in that. The law says a lot of things. It also says something about treating strangers with kindness. Pretty sure I heard that in church a time or two." Fletcher sputtered, but before he could respond, Worth's wife moved forward. She approached Lian slowly, like approaching a skittish animal, and smiled. "I'm Martha Worth," she said carefully, speaking louder than necessary, like volume would overcome the language barrier. "You're welcome here." Lian looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragement. She turned back to Martha and said, clearly and carefully, "Thank you, I am Lian. This is my daughter Ming." Martha's face lit up. "Oh, you speak English?" "Little bit, learning more." "Well, that's just wonderful." Martha looked at Ming, who'd pressed herself against Caleb's leg. "And aren't you a brave little thing? How old are you, sweetheart?" Ming looked up at Lian, who translated the question. Ming held up 7 fingers. "7? Why, my youngest is 8. I bet you two would get along." Martha glanced at her husband, who nodded, then looked at the assembled crowd. "I don't know about all the rest of you, but I see a family trying to make their way in a hard world. Same as all of us. Don't see why they should be treated different." "Because they're Chinese," Fletcher snapped. "So? They're also people. Or did I miss the part in Scripture where Jesus said to only help folks who look like us?" That got a few uncomfortable laughs. Even Cooper cracked a smile. Fletcher looked around, seeing he was losing the crowd. "This is ridiculous. You're all letting Rourke manipulate you with sentiment. The fact is, Worth interrupted, that I've been watching Rourke's place from my land. Haven't seen anything improper. Just a man taking care of people who needed help. That's not a crime, Tom. It's decent behavior. Maybe you should try it sometime." Fletcher's face went from red to purple. He looked at Cooper. "Sheriff, are you going to allow this?" Cooper looked at Caleb, then at Lian and Ming, then at the crowd. Caleb could see him calculating, weighing his options. "Far as I can see," Cooper said slowly, "there's no crime being committed here. Rourke's on his own property, doing what he wants with people he's chosen to help. That's his right. But the marshal's got better things to do than ride down here because you don't like Rourke's house guest, Tom. Let it go." Fletcher looked like he'd been slapped. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and stalked away, a few of his supporters following. The rest of the crowd slowly dispersed, though several people made a point of nodding to Caleb or saying quiet words to Lian. Martha Worth insisted on inviting them to Sunday dinner, and before Caleb could politely refuse, Lian had accepted. They ended up at the Worth farmhouse, a cheerful place with a large table and 5 children ranging from 17 to 8. The youngest, a girl named Emma, was immediately fascinated by Ming and dragged her off to see her doll collection. At the dinner table, surrounded by the Worth family's easy chaos, something extraordinary happened. Ming laughed. It was just a small sound, barely audible over the general noise. But Caleb heard it, and he saw Lian freeze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Their eyes met across the table, and in that moment, they both understood the weight of that small sound. Ming was healing. Actually healing, not just her body, but the deeper wounds that didn't show. After dinner, while the women cleaned and the children played outside, Worth and Caleb sat on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You know Fletcher's not going to stop," Worth said. "I know." "He's embarrassed, angry, feels like you made him look small." "I didn't make him do anything. He did that himself." Worth chuckled. "True enough. Still, you should be careful. Men like that, he'll look for ways to hurt you." "Let him try." "Caleb," Worth's voice turned serious, "I'm on your side in this, but I need to ask, what's your plan? Long term, I mean. You can't protect them forever. And that little girl, she's going to need schooling. Leon's going to need work. You thought about any of that?" Caleb had. Late at night, while Leon and Ming slept, he'd thought about little else. "Working on it," he said. "Work faster. Because winter's coming, and that cabin of yours isn't built for 3 people. You're going to need help." "Offering?" "Maybe. Some of us talked after church. There's folks willing to pitch in, build you an addition maybe, help you winterize, but..." Worth hesitated. "There's talk about you and the woman." "What kind of talk?" "The kind you'd expect. People wondering about the nature of your relationship, whether it's proper, having her under your roof unmarried." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Nothing improper about it. I believe you, but appearances matter in small towns. And if you want folks to accept them, you might need to think about making things official." "You're saying I should marry her?" "I'm saying it would solve a lot of problems. Give Leanne legal protection, make Ming's status clearer. Show the town you're serious about this being a family, not just temporary charity." Caleb stared out at the darkening plains. Marriage. The word felt heavy, loaded with memories of Sarah and vows made and broken by death. Could he do that again? Open himself up to that kind of loss? But then he thought of Leon's face when Ming had laughed, the way she looked at him sometimes, like he was something more than just the man who'd taken them in. The strange, fragile thing growing between them that felt like it might be the beginning of something real. "I'll think about it," he said. Worth clapped him on the shoulder. "That's all I ask." They rode home in comfortable silence, Ming asleep in Caleb's arms, Leon riding beside them. The stars were out, brilliant in the clear air. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and vast and somehow less lonely than it had been. At the cabin, Caleb carried Ming inside and laid her in the bed they'd built for her, just a simple frame with a mattress tucked in the corner. She barely stirred, exhausted from her first real day out. Leon covered her with a blanket and stood watching her sleep. "Today was good day," she said softly. "Yeah. People were kind. Not all, but enough. Martha Worth's already planning to have you over again. I could see it in her eyes." Leon smiled. "She is a good woman. She has good heart. Like someone else I know." Leon turned to look at him. They were standing close, closer than necessary in the small cabin. Caleb could smell the soap she'd used that morning, see the way lamplight caught in her dark hair. "Caleb," she said, and there was something in her voice, a question, maybe, or an invitation. He stepped closer. "Leon, I need to ask you something." "Ask? Would you?" He stopped, the words catching. This was harder than facing down armed men. "Would you consider staying permanently? Not just until Ming's better, I mean really staying, building a life here. With me." Leon's eyes widened. "You mean?" "I mean marriage. If you'd have me. I know it's not romantic. I know I'm not offering much, just a small cabin and hard work and a life that's going to be difficult no matter what. But I can promise you'll be safe, both of you. And I'll work every day to make sure you never regret saying yes." Leanne was quiet for so long that Caleb started to think he'd made a terrible mistake. Then she reached up and touched his face, the same gesture she'd made weeks ago, but this time there was no hesitation in it. "You think you are not offering much," she said, "but you offer everything. Safety, home, family. You offer me and Ming a reason to keep living instead of just surviving." Her eyes were wet. "Yes. I will marry you. I will build life with you, because you are a good man, Caleb Rourke. And I think maybe I love you." The words hit him like a thunderbolt. "You think?" "I know," she corrected, smiling through tears. "I know I love you. I love how you fight for us. How you are gentle with Ming, how you look at me like I am not broken thing, but whole person." She moved closer. "I love you, and I choose you. And I will spend rest of my life showing you that was right choice." Caleb pulled her into his arms, and she came without hesitation. They stood like that in the small cabin, holding each other while Ming slept, and the wind whispered outside and the future stretched out before them, uncertain, but no longer empty. "I love you too," Caleb said into her hair. "Never thought I'd say that again. Never thought I'd feel it. But I do. I love you, Lianzhou." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Then kiss me, Caleb Rourke. Make this real." So he did. The kiss was careful at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then deeper, carrying everything they couldn't say out loud, all the grief and hope and desperate need for connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Well," Caleb said, "that's settled then." Lian laughed, bright and real. "Yes, is settled." They married 3 weeks later in Worth's parlor, with Martha as witness and Ming standing between them, holding both their hands. Cooper officiated, reading the words quickly and without flourish. Fletcher wasn't there. Neither were his supporters, but Worth was, and Martha, and a surprising number of townspeople who decided that love was love no matter where it came from. When Cooper pronounced them husband and wife, Ming shouted, "Mama, Baba!" and threw her arms around both of them, and Caleb realized he was crying, actually crying, for the first time since Sarah's funeral. But these were different tears. These were the kind that came from joy instead of loss. The winter that followed was hard but manageable. Worth and some of the other men came out and helped Caleb build an addition to the cabin. A proper bedroom for him and Lian, with a real door and a window that let in morning light. Ming grew stronger every day. By December, she was running around the property, helping with chores, chattering in a mix of Chinese and English that made Lian laugh, and Caleb shake his head in wonder. Martha Worth had taken Lian under her wing, teaching her English and introducing her to the other women in town. Not all of them were welcoming, but enough were that Lian started to build a life beyond the cabin. Caleb found himself busier than he'd been in years. The ranch needed work. Ming needed teaching. Lian needed help with heavy tasks her arm couldn't handle. But it was good work, the kind that left you tired in a satisfying way instead of empty. Fletcher stayed away, though his hatred simmered like a banked fire. Caleb knew it would flare up eventually. Men like Fletcher didn't forget. The confrontation came in late February, on a day so cold the ground rang like iron when you walked on it. Caleb was in town getting supplies when he found Fletcher waiting by his horse. The man looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. "Rourke," Fletcher said. "Fletcher. Heard you got married, to the Chinese woman. News travels. You proud of yourself? Throwing your life away for people who don't belong here?" Caleb finished tying down his supplies before answering. "I'm proud of building something instead of tearing it down. That's more than you can say." Fletcher's face twisted. "You think you've won, that people have accepted you, but they haven't. They're just being polite. Underneath, they know you're wrong. You and your Chinese wife and that half-breed kid you're trying to pass off as family." The words hit like fists. Caleb turned slowly, and whatever Fletcher saw in his face made the man take a step back. "You can say what you want about me," Caleb said quietly, "but you talk about my wife or my daughter like that again, and we're going to have a different kind of conversation." "Daughter?" Fletcher laughed, harsh and bitter. "She's not your daughter. She's just some Chinese orphan you picked up. She'll never be your daughter." "Never be anything but." Caleb's fist caught Fletcher square in the mouth. The man went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. "She calls me Pa," Caleb said, standing over him. "That makes her my daughter. And if I ever hear you disrespecting my family again, hitting you will be the least of your problems." Fletcher spat blood. "You'll regret this." "I doubt it." Caleb mounted Rust and rode out of town without looking back. His knuckles throbbed where they'd connected with Fletcher's jaw, and he knew there would be consequences. But in that moment, he didn't care. Some things were worth fighting for. When he got home, Lian took one look at his bruised hand and sighed. "What did you do?" Fletcher said something he shouldn't have. About us? About Ming. Lian's expression hardened. What'd he say? Doesn't matter, he won't say it again. She studied his face, then nodded. Good. I'm glad you hit him. He deserve it. Ming came running from the bedroom, her face lit up. Baba! Baba, look! She held up a piece of paper covered in careful English letters. Her handwriting was shaky but readable. I write my name. See? M-I-N-G, Ming. Caleb picked her up, something he'd started doing without thinking about it. She was getting bigger, solid, and healthy. That's perfect, sweetheart. You're getting so smart. Mama, teach me. Now I teach you Chinese? Deal. Ming wiggled down and ran back to practice more letters. Lian moved close to Caleb, slipping her good arm around his waist. You are good, father, she said. Still learning. So? We all still learning. That is life. They stood in the doorway of their cabin, their home, watching Ming work at the table, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled, but inside it was warm. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like the land was testing to see if winter was really finished. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and mud. The first wildflowers appeared, tiny and determined. Caleb planted a garden with Lian's help, digging rows in the hard earth while Ming helped by carrying seeds in her pockets and occasionally remembering to put them in the ground instead of eating them. Fletcher never apologized, but he stopped making trouble. Word had spread about the fight, and the general opinion seemed to be that he'd gotten what he deserved. A few people still gave Lian and Ming cold looks in town, but most had moved from tolerance to acceptance. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. There would always be people who saw them as outsiders, as wrong, as something to be fixed or removed. But there were also people like the Worths, like Cooper, like the young farmer who'd spoken up that first day. People who understood that family wasn't about blood or nationality or anything except the choice to stand together. One warm morning in April, Caleb woke to find Ming sitting on his bed, staring at him with those serious eyes. Baba? Yeah, sweetheart? I have bad dream. Come here. She crawled under the blanket, and he held her while Lian slept on. Ming was shaking slightly, the way she did when memories of her father's death or the bandits surfaced. Want to talk about it? Caleb asked. I dream that men come. Take Mama and me away. You try to fight, but there are too many. She looked up at him. Then I wake up, and you are here, still here. I'm not going anywhere, Ming. Neither is your mama. This is our home, all of us together. You promise? I promise. She was quiet for a moment, then, Baba? I do not remember my first father very well anymore. His face is going away. That make me bad daughter? Caleb's throat tightened. No, honey, that makes you human. People fade sometimes. It's okay to let go. But I do not want to forget him. He was a good man, like you. Then remember what you can, and know that he'd be happy you found someone to take care of you. Ming nodded against his chest. You think he is watching from heaven? Maybe. I like to think the people we've lost can see us sometimes, see that we're okay. Then my first father knows I am safe with you. And your first wife knows you are happy with Mama, and everyone is okay. The simple wisdom of it made Caleb smile. Yeah, something like that. Ming drifted back to sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was protected. Caleb lay awake a while longer, thinking about Sarah, about whether she could see him now, see what he'd built from the ruins of their life together. He hoped she could. Hoped she understood that loving Lian didn't mean forgetting her, that raising Ming didn't replace the child they'd lost, that he'd kept the best parts of Sarah alive by choosing to be the man she'd believed he could be, the man who stood up when it mattered, who chose love over fear, who built instead of destroyed. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and endless blue sky. The garden produced more than they needed, so Lian started selling vegetables in town. Ming learned to ride Rust, sitting tall in the saddle like she'd been born to it. Caleb fixed the fence line that had started this whole impossible journey, and this time he built it to last. On an evening in July, they sat outside watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and purple. Ming was teaching Caleb Chinese words, giggling every time he mangled the pronunciation. Lian was mending a shirt, her movements easy and practiced. It was so ordinary, so beautifully, perfectly ordinary. "What you thinking?" Leon asked, noticing his expression. "That I almost missed this. All of it. I was so busy being dead inside that I almost rode right past the best thing that ever happened to me." "But you did not ride past. You stopped. You chose to see us. That is what matter." "Baba?" Ming tugged on his sleeve. "You are crying?" "Just a little." "Why?" "Because I'm happy, sweetheart." Ming considered that, then nodded sagely. "Mama cries when she is happy too. I think maybe adults are confused." Leon laughed, rich and full. "Yes, adults are very confused, but we do our best." As the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars emerged, Caleb looked at his family, this strange, impossible family built from loss and choice and stubborn hope, and knew he'd finally found what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not a return to what he'd had with Sarah, not a replacement for what he'd lost, but something new, something that honored the past while embracing the future, a life that acknowledged grief while refusing to be defined by it. Ming fell asleep against his shoulder, her small body warm and trusting. Leon's hand found his, their fingers interlacing like they'd been designed to fit together. And Caleb Rourke, who'd spent 3 years trying to die, discovered he was fully, completely, gratefully alive. The plain stretched out forever in every direction, vast and empty and beautiful. Somewhere out there, Fletcher was probably still nursing his anger. Somewhere out there, other threats waited. But here, now, in this moment, there was only peace. A man who'd been hollowed out by loss had been filled again by love. A woman who'd lost everything had found a new beginning. A child who'd faced death had chosen life. 3 people who had no business surviving had not only survived, but thrived. Had built something real and lasting from broken pieces. Had made a family. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not where they'd come from or what they'd lost or who thought they didn't belong. Just that they'd found each other. Just that they'd chosen each other. Just that they'd decided love was stronger than hate. Hope was stronger than fear. And that standing together made them all stronger than they'd ever been alone. The stars wheeled overhead. The wind whispered secrets across the grass. And in a small cabin on the Wyoming plains, 3 people who'd been strangers just months ago slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were home, that they were family, that they were finally and forever exactly where they belonged.